Hey there, tonight we're diving into the grueling world of ancient Egyptian quarries. Not the romanticized adventure you might imagine, but a back-breaking reality where each stone block tells tales of sweat and survival. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. So, you've woken up in the land of pharaohs, and today your destiny is carved in stone, literally. You're about to spend a day in an ancient Egyptian quarry, where the only thing more relentless than the sun is the work itself. It's dawn, and the horizon is already a swirling canvas of reds and oranges over Aswan, one of the key quarry sites where Egyptians extracted the granite for their monumental ambitions. Forget your snooze button here. Time isn't measured by the chime of a clock, but by the inexorable march of the sun across the sky. In ancient Egypt, keeping time was a sunlit affair. They didn't have wristwatches or digital clocks, no surprise there. But they did have shadow clocks and water clocks, which sounds pretty high-tech for 2500 BCE. The shadow clock, or sundial, was divided into 12 parts, meaning your workday was neatly split into hours. But let's not kid ourselves. An hour could stretch or shrink depending on the season. So your complaint about working overtime isn't going to fly here. You're not alone in this quarry of dreams, or rather nightmares. The place is buzzing with activity, and you're part of a sizable crew. The laborers are the heart of this operation, the ones who actually do the back-breaking work of chiseling away at these stubborn stones. Skilled craftsmen, on the other hand, are the rock stars of this world, quite literally chiseling out their place in history with every swing of the mallet. And then there are the overseers, those ever-watchful eyes making sure the pharaoh's deadline is met. No pressure, right? Now, let's talk geography. You're standing in Aswan, a site famous for its granite, a rock so hard it makes your average countertop look like a marshmallow. This granite was the cherry on top of Egypt's architectural sundae, used to cap pyramids and create colossal statues that screamed were a big deal to anyone within a 500-mile radius. Meanwhile, Tura near Cairo was known for its fine limestone, used in the casing stones that gave the pyramids their iconic gleam. These quarries were the ancient world's Home Depot, but with a lot more sweat and a lot less air conditioning. As you look around, you might think, this doesn't look like a good career move. And you'd be right. The logistics of running a quarry were as complex as any modern mega-project. Transporting stone blocks weighing up to 60 tons required a combination of manpower, ingenuity, and sheer stubbornness. They used sledges and ropes, lubricating the sand with water to reduce friction, a nifty ancient hack. But let's face it, this was no joyride. If you thought your morning commute was bad, try hauling a multi-ton block across the desert. The labor force in these quarries wasn't a group of cheerful volunteers. Many were conscripted peasants working off their taxes in a system that sounds suspiciously like indentured servitude. Others were drafted during the inundation season when the Nile flooded the fields, turning farmers into temporary stone shifters. Skilled craftsmen, however, were a notch above. They were trained artisans whose work was driven by precision and artistry. Not that their lives were cushy, mind you, but let's not get swept away by the romantic notion of craftsmen lovingly chiseling each stone with artistic flair. The reality was closer to a relentless grind, with strict quotas and even stricter overseers. And speaking of overseers, these guys were the middle management types, making sure everything ran smoother than a well-oiled chariot wheel. Their job was to ensure that no one slacked off and that the pharaoh's grand vision stayed on schedule. They may not have had email, but they sure had ways to make you wish you were somewhere else. Why did all this matter? Well, Egypt's monumental architecture was a physical manifestation of divine kingship. The pyramids, obelisks, and temples weren't just stone structures. They were propaganda pieces, showing off the might and glory of the pharaoh. Ensuring these projects were completed on time and with precision was a matter of state pride, if not survival. The pharaohs had a vested interest in keeping the gods, and by extension their people, happy. So as you stand there, chisel in hand, you're not just a cog in a machine. You're part of a grand cosmic scheme. You're shaping the stones that will shape history. But before you get too carried away with grandiosity, remember that the sun is climbing higher, and your hands are already blistering. Welcome to the Quarry, a place where the sweat is real, the stakes are high, and the only thing grander than the stones is the ambition behind them. And just like that, with the sun climbing higher in the sky, the reality of quarry life hits you like a stone hammer to the thumb. You've got your chisel in hand and a massive block of granite in front of you. There's no turning back. The romantic vision of being an ancient craftsman, meticulously shaping stone with artistic finesse, is quickly replaced by the brutal truth. This is a feat of endurance, not artistry. Forget the precision of a sculptor. Today, you're more like a human jackhammer. Let's talk tools of the trade, shall we? Ever heard of Dalarite balls? No, they're not the latest fitness craze. They're ancient Egypt's answer to your trusty sledgehammer. Picture bowling balls, but made of rock, and you're halfway there. These were used to pound away at the granite, breaking off chunks with each swing. Imagine swinging one of these for hours under the relentless sun. Makes your kettlebell workout look like a warm-up, doesn't it? The chisels, on the other hand, were made of copper. And if you think copper sounds a bit too soft for the job, you'd be right. These chisels needed constant sharpening, adding another layer to your already exhausting day. While we're on the subject of exhausting, let's not ignore the stats. It's estimated that on-the-job injuries in these quarries were as common as grains of sand in the desert. Cuts, bruises, and broken bones were part of the occupational hazards. And forget about OSHA regulations. The only safety net here was the hope that you'd avoid a direct hit from a wayward hammer. The odds of injury were high, but so was the pressure to keep working. Ever wonder why ancient Egyptians were so keen on mummification? Maybe it was because they spent half their lives dodging workplace hazards. Now, if you're thinking, I lift weights at the gym, I could handle this, let me stop you right there. Lifting a dumbbell isn't quite the same as smashing a Dalarite ball against granite for hours on end. The average stone block these workers dealt with weighed tens of tons. Imagine dragging that across the desert, all while the overseer makes sure you're not slacking off. It's less cross-fit, and more cross your fingers you don't collapse. As the sun reaches its zenith, you're probably wishing for a break. But in the world of ancient Egypt, break times were as rare as a cool breeze in the desert. You get a moment to gulp down some water and maybe munch on a bit of bread and onions. Not exactly the protein shake you might be used to, but hey, carbs are carbs, right? This was your fuel for the day, and you'd need every bit of it to keep swinging, chiseling, and hauling. But let's not get too bogged down in the doom and gloom. The truth is, these laborers were part of something bigger than themselves. They were building monuments that would stand the test of time, quite literally. The stones they carved would become the backbone of Egypt's greatest architectural achievements. There's a certain romance in that, even if the reality is less rosy. Imagine telling your future grandkids, see that giant pyramid? I helped make that. It's the kind of legacy that makes even the most grueling work seem worthwhile. Economically speaking, these quarries were vital to Egypt's economy. The stones extracted here were not just used for local projects, but were also traded with neighboring regions, making them an essential part of Egypt's wealth and influence. The laborers, craftsmen, and overseers were all cogs in a vast machine that powered the empire. The demand for stone was enormous, and the pressure to meet that demand was equally so. Politically, these quarries were as much about power as they were about stone. The pharaohs knew that monumental architecture was propaganda in its most literal form. Every obelisk, every temple, every monument was a testament to their divine right to rule. The stones you were chiseling today were part of that narrative, a story told in granite and limestone, designed to awe and inspire. So, while you're drenched in sweat, covered in dust, and nursing blisters, remember that you're not just shaping stone. You're shaping history. But don't get too carried away with grandiosity just yet. The sun's still high, your day's far from over, and the stones aren't going to carve themselves. Welcome to the grind, where every swing of the hammer is a testament to human endurance, ambition, and let's face it, stubbornness. As the sun beats down, you finally get that much-needed pause in the relentless grind. But let's not get too excited. If you're picturing a serene picnic under a shade tree, think again. This is ancient Egypt, not a Tuscan vineyard. It's time for the midday meal, but it's less banquet and more bare bones. Forget the lavish feasts of Cleopatra and the pharaohs. You're not dining on stuffed dormice or honey cakes. Your menu is strictly proletarian, more bread and onions than ambrosia and nectar. Welcome to the reality of ancient Egyptian sustenance, where your midday break involves gnawing on a chunk of bread that could double as a building material. This isn't your soft, fluffy artisan loaf. It's dense and tough, likely filled with enough grit to polish a statue. The bread was a staple, made from emmer wheat or barley, the ancient grains that fueled Egypt's economy and its laborers. And let's not forget the piece de resistance, onions. Yes, onions were the Gouda vegetable, adding a bit of flavor, or at least a sharp kick, to your otherwise bland diet. Think of them as the original breath mints, in the sense that they made sure everyone kept their distance. Quarry workers' meals were washed down with beer, but don't get too excited. This wasn't the hoppy craft brew that you might sip on a lazy Sunday afternoon. Ancient Egyptian beer was more like a thick, porridge-like brew, nutritious, but not exactly refreshing. It was essentially liquid bread, providing the carbs and calories needed to keep swinging those Dalarite balls. And while that might sound unappealing, remember that water safety was iffy at best. Beer offered a safer, and let's admit, slightly more enjoyable, alternative to quenching your thirst. But what about the myth of Egyptian abundance and eternal feasts? While it's true that the elite feasted like gods, the average worker was as far from a royal banquet as you are from winning the lottery. The images of endless bounty depicted in tomb paintings were more aspiration than reality for most. They were like Instagram influencers of the ancient world, presenting an idealized version of life that most could only dream of. Yet, even in the harsh conditions of the quarry, these meager meals served a purpose. They were the fuel that kept Egypt's monumental machine running. Speaking of machines, let's talk compensation. You might not get paid in gold coins or precious gems, but in a system that could best be described as you work, you eat. Rations were the currency of the realm. Workers received their daily bread, literally, as part of their wages, along with other essentials like oil and fish. There were no direct deposits or paychecks here. This was a barter economy, and sustenance was the name of the game. Laborers also received clothing and shelter as part of their compensation, although shelter might be a generous term. Imagine cramped, mud-brick barracks, and you'll get the idea. Your digs were basic but functional, providing a place to rest your weary body after a day of non-stop hammering. In a society where survival was often a day-to-day struggle, these provisions were a lifeline. The socio-economic dynamics of ancient Egypt were as complex as the hieroglyphs that decorated temple walls. You, as a laborer, were at the bottom of a hierarchy that stretched from the lowliest worker to the divine pharaoh himself. But everyone played their part in this grand societal tapestry. The labor you put into the quarries helped build not just the pyramids and temples, but the very economy that sustained the empire. The quarry workers were part of a workforce that was mobilized not just by economic necessity, but by a sense of duty to the state. In a land where the pharaoh was a living god, your work was a form of worship. Each stone you helped extract was an offering to the divine, a piece of a larger puzzle that, when completed, would ensure the continued favor of the gods. The grandeur of the monuments was a testament to the labor of countless hands, each chisel mark a prayer in stone. The broader economic picture was equally fascinating. These quarries were the bedrock, quite literally, of Egypt's economic might. Stone wasn't just a building material. It was a trading commodity, shipped along the Nile and beyond. The demand for Egyptian stone was high, and its extraction was critical to maintaining the empire's wealth and influence. The stones you helped carve out of the earth were more than just construction materials. They were currency in a trade network that stretched across the ancient world. Politically, the quarries were a testament to the pharaoh's power and reach. Each block of stone was a political statement, a demonstration of the ability to marshal resources and labor on an unprecedented scale. The monuments built from these stones were not just architectural wonders. They were declarations of divine authority, visible for miles around, and intended to project power both domestically and to foreign lands. As you sit there, munching on your gritty bread and sipping your porridge-like beer, it's easy to feel like just another cog in the machine. But in reality, you're part of something much bigger. The sweat and toil of the quarry workers were the foundation upon which the glory of ancient Egypt was built. It's a bit of a romantic notion, isn't it? The idea that your hard work contributes to something magnificent and enduring. But let's not get too lost in the romance. The sun's still high, and the stones are waiting. Your break is over, and it's time to get back to shaping history, one grueling swing at a time. And just like that, your brief respite is over. The sun's still blazing, the stones aren't going to move themselves, and the afternoon shift is calling. As you heft your chisel and head back to the grind, let's tackle one of the biggest misconceptions about this ancient labor force, the notion that it was primarily composed of slaves. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Sure, the idea that the pyramids were built by legions of enslaved workers is a captivating story. After all, who doesn't love a good underdog tale of human endurance against oppressive masters? But the reality is as nuanced as an Egyptian mural. While there certainly were slaves in ancient Egypt, the labor force in the quarries was primarily made up of conscripted peasants, skilled artisans, and seasonal workers. These folks were more like the gig economy of the ancient world, only instead of delivering your pad thai, they were delivering tons of stone. And let's talk skilled artisanship, shall we? These weren't just any workers. They were the creme de la creme of stone carvers, trained in techniques that were handed down through generations. The craftsmen were the unsung heroes of this Herculean effort, transforming rough blocks into the finely detailed components of temples and monuments. Their work was judged not just by human eyes, but by those of the gods, or so they believed. Messing up wasn't just a career risk, it was a cosmic faux pas. But why all the fuss over stones, you ask? Well, these weren't just any rocks. They were symbols of eternity, chosen for their durability to ensure that the pharaoh's legacy would outlast even the sands of time. Each block was a testament to divine kingship, a physical manifestation of the ruler's power and godly status. So, when you were chiseling away, you were essentially etching the pharaoh's immortality into the earth. No pressure. Let's dive into the logistics, because getting these behemoths from quarry to construction site was no small feat. Imagine moving a 60-ton block with a bunch of ropes and a sled, often over miles of unforgiving terrain. No cranes, no forklifts, just manpower and a lot of ingenuity. Workers would haul these stones on wooden sledges, lubricating the sand with water to reduce friction. It was a colossal group effort, a testament to human stubbornness and teamwork that rivals any modern-day engineering project. So, while you're out here sweating under the sun, it's worth remembering that this wasn't just labor for labor's sake. The stones you're chiseling had a destination, grandeur. They were destined to become part of the architectural wonders that would awe both contemporaries and future generations. The Great Pyramid of Giza, for instance, was not just a tomb. It was a statement of divine authority and a challenge to time itself. A modern romantic vision might paint these workers as noble craftsmen, but the reality was a bit grittier. Sure, the artisans had skills that would make any sculptor envious, but their lives were anything but glamorous. They worked under tight deadlines, with overseers breathing down their necks. The pressure was immense, not just to meet quotas, but to ensure that the divine message of the pharaoh was conveyed precisely in stone. Now, let's zoom out for a moment and look at the broader context. These quarries were more than just stone extraction sites. They were the backbone of Egypt's monumental economy. The stones were not just for local consumption, but were also traded with neighboring states, making them a cornerstone of Egypt's wealth and influence. The demand for quality stone was a driving force in the economy, and the quarries were a critical part of this supply chain. Politically, the stakes were just as high. The pharaohs knew that monumental architecture was more than just a display of wealth. It was a tool of governance and a declaration of divine right. Each stone block was a building block of propaganda, a message carved in granite and limestone that said, "We are here, and we are eternal." The sheer scale of these projects was a testament to the centralized power of the state. But let's not kid ourselves. A lot of this was about image. The pharaohs weren't just building for the gods. They were building for their peers, creating legacies that would outshine their predecessors and intimidate their rivals. It was an ancient arms race, but instead of nuclear warheads, they had obelisks and pyramids. So, as you wipe the sweat from your brow and return to the relentless rhythm of hammer and chisel, remember that you're not just carving stone, you're carving history. You're part of a grand narrative that spans millennia, a story written in the very earth beneath your feet. It's a legacy of ambition, endurance, and a bit of madness, all rolled into one. But enough of the philosophical musings. The sun's still high in the sky, and those stones aren't moving themselves. It's back to the grind, back to shaping the future one swing at a time. Just remember, the monuments you're helping to create will stand long after today's blisters have healed. And as the afternoon wears on, you can take a small comfort in knowing that your toil isn't just for today, it's for eternity. As the shadows stretch across the quarry and the sun dips towards the horizon, you can finally pause and take stock of the day's toil. Your muscles are screaming, your hands are raw, and you're pretty sure you've inhaled enough dust to build your own pyramid. But here, in the fading light of day, you get a moment to reflect on the legacy you're helping to create. A legacy that's been romanticized, mythologized, and let's be honest, often misunderstood. Now, let's dismantle the myth that these workers were just nameless cogs in a grand machine, slaves with chisels. Far from it. Archaeological evidence, like the workers' village discovered at Giza, shows that these laborers weren't just crammed into makeshift huts. They had organized settlements with bakeries, breweries, and even medical care. Talk about a comprehensive benefits package. The workers were compensated with food, beer, and a sense of purpose. A far cry from the slave narrative that Hollywood loves to sell. These workers were often peasants fulfilling their tax obligations or craftsmen honing their skills. Their work was hard, but it was also a source of pride. Imagine being part of a project that would define an entire civilization. It's like being in the original "We Built This City" music video, minus the synth pop and questionable fashion choices. And while the pharaohs got all the credit, it was the sweat and skill of these laborers that truly brought the monuments to life. Let's zoom out and consider the broader socio-political dynamics at play. The monuments weren't just about leaving a mark on history. They were about maintaining the social order. The pyramids and temples were physical manifestations of divine kingship, reinforcing the idea that the pharaoh was a god on earth. These structures weren't just tombs. They were propaganda, carved from the very earth, declaring the pharaoh's power and divine right to rule. But what about the human cost? The grandeur of these monuments came at a hefty price. The laborers faced grueling conditions, with injuries as abundant as grains of sand on the Nile's banks. The mortality rate was high, and those who didn't survive became part of the quarry's eternal history. Yet, in a society that viewed the afterlife as a continuation of this world, their sacrifices weren't seen as futile. They were part of a cosmic balance, ensuring the prosperity of the nation in both this life and the next. Now, let's address the allure of the romantic narrative. The idea of thousands of workers laboring under a blazing sun, united in a common purpose, is undeniably compelling. It's the stuff of legends, of epic tales passed down through generations. But the reality was far less glamorous. The work was brutal, the conditions harsh, and the rewards often intangible. Yet, despite the hardships, there was a camaraderie among the workers, a shared sense of purpose that transcended the daily grind. The legacy of these laborers is etched in stone, quite literally. The pyramids of Giza, the temples of Karnak, the obelisks that dotted the landscape, all are testaments to their skill and perseverance. These structures have stood the test of time, enduring for millennia as symbols of human achievement. They remind us of the enduring power of collective effort and the indomitable spirit of the workers who carved their place in history. And let's not forget the economic implications. These monumental projects were not just about showcasing power. They were economic engines that fueled the Egyptian economy. The quarries provided employment, stimulated trade, and created a demand for goods and services. The stones extracted from the earth were not just building materials. They were commodities traded across the ancient world, contributing to Egypt's wealth and influence. As the sun sets and the stars begin to twinkle in the sky, it's time to ponder the true cost of glory. The pharaohs achieved immortality through their monuments, but it was the laborers who paid the price. Their toil was the foundation upon which the empire was built, and their legacy, though often overshadowed, is no less significant. So, as you stand there, covered in dust, and contemplating your place in this grand narrative, remember that you're part of a story that spans millennia. Your day in the quarry may be over, but the impact of your work will endure long after the sun has set. It's a legacy as enduring as the stones themselves, a testament to human ambition, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of greatness. In the end, the towering legacy of the pharaohs is a reflection of the countless individuals who labored in their service. Their stories, though often untold, are as integral to history as the monuments they built. So, as you head back to your humble quarters, take a moment to appreciate the sweat and sacrifice that shaped the world as we know it. a world where the past is always present, carved in stone and remembered in the echoes of history. If you've ever marveled at the color purple and wondered why it was once the shade of emperors, you might owe a nod to the Phoenicians. These folks, who thrived from around 1500 BCE until their eventual fade into historical obscurity, were the Mediterranean's original sailors of fortune. They didn't just stumble upon fame and fortune, they practically invented it, one sea voyage at a time. Nestled along what we now call the Lebanese coast, Phoenician cities, like Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos, were perfectly positioned to become the Las Vegas of ancient seafaring. The geography was their wingman, with the coastline offering natural harbors that practically waved ships in like an air traffic controller having a good day. But the real kicker, they had cedar trees thicker than a Roman legionnaire's ego. These trees, abundant and sturdy, were the perfect raw material for building ships that could withstand the salty tantrums of the sea. Now, let's talk about the so-called Purple Empire. The name makes it sound like they were ruling over some kind of royal utopia, draped in luxurious violet tapestries. In reality, though, the Phoenicians were more like the scrappy startup founders of antiquity, hustling their way across the Mediterranean. They weren't conquering lands with armies. They were conquering minds with trade and innovation. The purple part, oh, that comes down to their knack for extracting Tyrian purple dye from the murex snail, a process so laborious and pungent that it could make a medieval alchemist's workshop seem like a walk in the park. It took about 10,000 snails to produce a single gram of dye, which was worth its weight in gold. Talk about a slimy business model. But just how glamorous was it, really, to be a seafaring Phoenician? Imagine spending weeks on a wooden boat with no Wi-Fi, powered by a combination of wind and sheer desperation. The reality was more deadliest catch than lifestyles of the rich and famous. Yet, these maritime maestros weren't just peddling purple dye. They were the Amazon prime of their day, shipping goods like timber, glass, and wine across the known world. They made waves, literally and metaphorically, by establishing trade routes that stretched from Cyprus to Carthage, and even as far as the Iberian Peninsula. Sure, the romantic notion of the dauntless sailor exploring uncharted waters has its appeal. But let's not forget the harsh truth. The seas were as unpredictable as a Game of Thrones plot twist. Between rogue waves, pirate ambushes, and the occasional kraken, or more realistically, a giant squid, the Phoenicians had their hands full. Yet, they thrived because they turned challenges into opportunities. Phoenicians were the ultimate opportunists, always ready to barter, haggle, or trade a couple of amphorae of wine for something more exotic from far-off lands. So, next time you see something purple, think of the Phoenicians, the unsung heroes of ancient trade who built an empire not with swords or spears, but with sails and snails. They were the OG merchants of cool, navigating the treacherous waters of the Mediterranean long before it was trendy, proving that sometimes being the middleman really does pay off. Ah, the Phoenicians, true pioneers of the ancient gig economy, except instead of coding, they were building ships that could make even Poseidon envious. Let's steer into the heart of their maritime magic, where wood and water met the genius of ancient engineering. These were not your run-of-the-mill canoes. Phoenician ships were the Lamborghinis of the sea lanes. Their shipbuilding skills were no accident. This was a civilization that took innovation and slapped it onto the side of a boat. The backbone of their nautical prowess was the ubiquitous Lebanese cedar, a wood so revered that even the Egyptians couldn't resist importing it for their grandiose building projects. These trees weren't just tall, dark, and handsome. They were rot-resistant and buoyant, a shipbuilder's dream. The Phoenicians used a technique called morais and tenon, which sounds like something you'd hear from a woodworking YouTube channel, but was essentially an ancient form of IKEA assembly. This involved crafting tight-fitting joints that held the ship's planks together without a single nail in sight. Imagine the precision of that craftsmanship. It's like building a house of cards, but with much higher stakes, and no instructions manual. But let's not sail too far off course without addressing the elephant in the room, the Tyrian purple dye. One can't discuss Phoenician trade without dipping into the world of snail snot. While it's easy to romanticize this vibrant hue as the color of choice for emperors and aristocrats, the process of making it was anything but glamorous. It was a smelly, labor-intensive ordeal that involved breaking open thousands of murex snails just to extract a single ounce of the precious dye. An average tunic dyed with this purple could cost as much as 3 pounds of gold. That's a wardrobe choice that screams, "Look at me, I'm worth more than your entire village." And yet, this purple gold mine was only one piece of the Phoenician trade puzzle. They were the ultimate middlemen in a time when just browsing could get you a one-way trip to the bottom of the sea. From the timber forests of Lebanon to the olive groves of Greece, Phoenicians bought low and sold high, moving goods like glass, wine, and metals with a deftness that would make Wall Street traders blush. Their ships were floating bazaars, each one a cornucopia of ancient consumer goods that bridged cultures and economies across the Mediterranean. But how did they manage to pull off this trading coup? The Phoenicians had a knack for making friends and influencing people, a skill as valuable as gold in ancient times. They established colonies and trading posts from Cyprus to North Africa, each one a hub of commerce and cultural exchange. Cities like Carthage, which started as a Phoenician colony, became powerhouses in their own right, contributing to a network that spanned across the known world. It's like they were playing a game of Risk, but instead of armies, they were deploying merchant fleets. The Phoenician trade model was also about diversification. They weren't just pushing one product. They were the original jack of all trades. Need some Iberian silver? They've got it. Want some Cypriot copper? No problem. In the mood for some Egyptian papyrus? Step right up. This diversified portfolio ensured that the Phoenicians had their fingers in every pie, a strategy that modern economists would surely applaud. Yet, despite their dominance in trade, the Phoenicians didn't bother with the glitz and glamour of empire building. They left the land grabbing to the Assyrians and the Egyptians, preferring instead to focus on their maritime ventures. Perhaps they understood something that others didn't, that real power lay not in vast territories, but in the connections between them. The Phoenicians were the LinkedIn of the ancient world, creating a network of influence that transcended borders and outlasted empires. Of course, this isn't to say the seas were smooth sailing. The Mediterranean was a treacherous workplace, with storms and pirates as common as rush-hour traffic. Yet, the Phoenicians thrived in this chaos, their ships cutting through the waves with the precision of a surgeon. They were the adrenaline junkies of their time, embracing the unpredictability of the sea with open arms. So, as we continue to explore the legacy of these ancient mariners, let's raise a glass of Phoenician wine, naturally, to their enduring spirit. Because when it comes down to it, the Phoenicians were more than just traders. They were the architects of a world connected by commerce and culture, proving that sometimes the best way to rule an empire is to sail right through it. So, as we continue to explore the legacy of these ancient mariners, let's raise a glass of Phoenician wine, naturally, to their enduring spirit. Because when it comes down to it, the Phoenicians were more than just traders. They were the architects of a world connected by commerce and culture, proving that sometimes the best way to rule an empire is to sail right through it. But let's not drift too far without anchoring ourselves in the gritty realities of their world. The Phoenicians weren't just setting sail to see the sights. They were weaving a complex tapestry of trade routes that resembled a Mediterranean game of connect the dots. These routes stretched from the Levantine coast all the way to the Iberian Peninsula, with stops that included Cyprus, North Africa, and even the far-flung shores of modern-day Britain. Yes, you heard that right. Those ancient sailors were working the high seas all the way to the British Isles, long before anyone had heard of fish and chips. The establishment of colonies was both a strategic and economic move, like setting up franchises in key locations. Take Carthage, for example, one of their most famous colonies, founded around 814 BCE. It wasn't just a place to park their ships. It became a powerhouse in its own right, a bustling hub of trade and culture. Carthage was the New York of the ancient Mediterranean, a melting pot where Phoenician blood mixed with local customs, creating a vibrant cultural stew that was both familiar and exotic. Now, before we get too carried away romanticizing this ancient globalization with images of peaceful trade and cultural comebares, let's get real. The Phoenician sailors weren't exactly sipping lattes and forging international friendships. Life on the road or sea was tough. They faced the constant threat of pirate attacks, unpredictable weather, and let's not forget the less-than-ideal onboard amenities. We're talking about the original travel nightmares, cramped quarters, no fresh food, and a sanitation system that was best described as overboard. But let's give credit where it's due. Despite these challenges, the Phoenicians managed to create a network of trade that was as strong as their ships. They were masters of the barter system, often trading goods like glass, metals, and textiles in exchange for local products. This wasn't just about moving goods, it was about moving ideas, technologies, and even people. Each transaction was a cultural exchange, a chance for new ideas to seep into the corners of the ancient world like ink spreading across a page. However, this idyllic notion of cultural exchange isn't without its caveats. The Phoenicians weren't just spreading good vibes and artisanal crafts. Their trade routes also facilitated the spread of less savory elements, such as disease and slavery. Yes, the darker side of ancient trade often mirrored the less appealing aspects of modern globalization. The same routes that carried precious goods and new ideas also transported human misery, as the Phoenicians took part in the slave trade, a grim reality that doesn't quite fit the narrative of peaceful merchants. Yet, the appeal of the Phoenician story is undeniable. They were the ultimate survivors, thriving in the chaos of the ancient Mediterranean, a sea notorious for its capricious winds and hidden dangers. It was a world where one wrong turn could lead to a watery grave, yet the Phoenicians navigated it with the confidence of a seasoned Uber driver dodging traffic. Their ability to read the stars, harness the winds, and adapt to ever-changing conditions made them legends of the sea. In the end, the Phoenicians weren't just middlemen. They were the linchpins of an interconnected world. Their trade routes were the arteries through which the ancient Mediterranean thrived, pumping life and prosperity into every port they touched. They showed that commerce could transcend borders, that trade could bring people together, or tear them apart. So, as we chart the course through the Phoenician legacy, let's remember both the glamour and the grime, the myths and the reality. These ancient mariners weren't just merchants. They were the navigators of an era, plotting courses that shaped the world as we know it. And while the seas may have been unforgiving, the Phoenician spirit was as resilient as the cedar ships they sailed, carving a path through history with every wave they conquered. As we sail deeper into the stormy seas of Phoenician history, let's dock at the bustling harbor of politics and society, the true wind beneath their sails. The Phoenicians were akin to expert chess players, strategically moving their pieces across the Mediterranean board while others were busy flipping tables. Just as their ships were built to withstand the capricious sea, their political acumen was crafted to navigate the equally turbulent waters of ancient geopolitics. First, let's address the elephant in the room. The Phoenicians were not a unified empire. Nope, no single Phoenician king holding court here. Instead, they were a loose confederation of city-states, each as independent as a teenager with their first car. Cities like Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos were the leading lights, each with its own ruler and its own agenda. This decentralized system was both their greatest strength and potential Achilles' heel. When it came to decision-making, they were like a family trying to decide on a pizza topping. Lots of opinions, but somehow they made it work. This independence gave the Phoenicians the flexibility of a yoga instructor. They could adapt quickly to changing political landscapes, which was crucial when you're sandwiched between heavyweights like Egypt and the rising Assyrian Empire. The Phoenicians mastered the art of diplomacy, often playing the role of the Mediterranean Switzerland, neutral, prosperous, and incredibly strategic. When the Assyrians came knocking with their army of doom around the 9th century BCE, the Phoenicians didn't reach for their swords. Instead, they offered tributes and trade agreements, turning potential enemies into business partners. After all, why fight when you can trade? And what about their social structure? Picture a society where merchants were the rock stars and sailors the roadies. In Phoenician cities, the merchant class was the backbone, driving innovation and prosperity. This was a society that valued skill and enterprise over noble birth, a refreshing change of pace in a world where lineage often trumped competence. It's as if the Phoenicians were centuries ahead in realizing that who you knew was less important than what you could do. Skills were the currency here, and trade was the bank. Yet, let's not get too misty-eyed over this ancient proto-meritocracy. Social mobility had its limits, and not everyone was living their best life. While the wealthy merchants were counting their coins, the lower classes were toiling away in workshops and fields. And let's not forget the slaves. Yes, The Phoenicians participated in that grim aspect of ancient society too. They may have been the original linked in, but with some profiles you definitely wouldn't want to endorse. Despite these inequalities, the Phoenicians were remarkably cohesive. Their shared culture was a unifying force that transcended city rivalries. They had a common language, a common religion, and most importantly, a common love of trade. This cultural glue held them together in times of crisis, allowing them to present a united front against external threats. Now, let's talk about their neighbors. The Phoenicians were like the popular kid in high school who somehow managed to stay friends with all the cliques. They had to constantly juggle relationships with the Egyptians, the Assyrians, and later, the Babylonians. Each empire had its own demands, and the Phoenicians were masters at giving just enough to keep everyone happy. They were the original political tightrope walkers, balancing tribute payments and trade agreements with the skill of a circus performer. Their interactions with these empires weren't just about survival, they were also opportunities. The Phoenicians were cultural magpies, adopting and adapting innovations from their more powerful neighbors. From the Egyptians, they borrowed art and religious practices, while the Assyrians influenced their architecture with grandiose city walls and towers. It was a two-way street, though. The Phoenicians exported their alphabet to these lands, which would eventually evolve into the Greek and Latin scripts. Talk about a legacy that writes itself. Of course, not all interactions were peaceful. The Phoenicians had their share of conflicts, particularly with the Greeks, who were emerging as serious contenders in the Mediterranean trade game. Yet, even these clashes had a silver lining. Competition spurred innovation, pushing the Phoenicians to refine their ship designs and improve their trade networks. It was like an ancient version of a tech arms race, with each side trying to outdo the other. The Phoenicians' political and social structures were as robust as their cedar ships, allowing them to weather the storms of history. They may not have built towering empires, but their influence was woven into the fabric of the ancient world. Their cities were the beating hearts of Mediterranean commerce, pumping life into the economic and cultural networks that connected distant shores. As we sail toward the conclusion of this journey, remember that the Phoenicians were more than just traders. They were the navigators of a complex geopolitical landscape. Their story is one of survival, adaptation, and innovation. They remind us that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in conquest, but in connection. And while the waves of history may have eventually washed their cities away, the legacy of the Phoenicians continues to ripple through time, shaping the world we know today. So, stay tuned as we continue to explore the impact of these ancient mariners in the final chapter of their saga, a tale that's far from over. But hold onto your amphory, because the legacy of the Phoenicians is about to take a deep dive into the murky waters of myth and reality. These ancient sailors left behind more than just a trail of purple-dyed tunics and cedar ships. They left an indelible mark on the Mediterranean world and beyond. So, let's pull back the veil and see how their contributions to navigation and literacy continue to ripple through history. First, let's chart the course of their nautical know-how. The Phoenicians were the GPS of the ancient world, long before satellites were a twinkle in humanity's eye. They perfected the art of celestial navigation, using the stars to guide their ships across the open sea. The North Star, Polaris, was their trusty companion, acting as a fixed point in the ever-changing night sky. This allowed them to venture far beyond the sight of land, a feat that would make even the most seasoned sailor today tip their captain's hat. Their ships, those wonders of Morais and Tenon engineering, were designed for both speed and durability, qualities essential for navigating the unpredictable Mediterranean. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of a sports car, with the rugged reliability of a pickup truck. These vessels weren't just for show. They were the backbone of a trade network so vast that it would make modern logistics companies green with envy. But perhaps the most enduring legacy is something far less tangible: the alphabet. The Phoenicians were the Steve Jobs of antiquity, revolutionizing communication with a system that made writing accessible to the masses. Before their innovation, writing was the domain of scribes and priests, with complex scripts that required years of study. Enter the Phoenician alphabet, a tidy set of 22 consonants that could be combined to form any word in the Phoenician language. It was like switching from hieroglyphics to text messages, fast, efficient, and oh so practical. This alphabet spread like wildfire, adopted and adapted by cultures across the Mediterranean. The Greeks took it, added vowels, because who doesn't love a good A-E-I-O-U, and passed it on to the Romans. From there, it morphed into the Latin script, which, as you might have noticed, is still very much in use today. So, the next time you jot down a grocery list, give a nod to the Phoenicians, the unsung heroes who made literacy something you could, quite literally, write home about. Yet, as with any good story, it's not all sunshine and sea breezes. The Phoenician legacy is tangled in a web of myths and misconceptions. For one, there's the romantic notion that they were the peaceful, pioneering traders of the ancient world. While it's true they preferred commerce to conquest, they weren't exactly handing out friendship bracelets at every port. They were shrewd business people, and their trade routes sometimes facilitated less savory elements like slavery and piracy. It's a reminder that progress often comes with a shadow, and the same routes that spread goods and knowledge also carried human misery. Then there's the myth of their disappearance. The narrative often paints the Phoenicians as a lost civilization, swallowed by the sands of time. But the truth is more nuanced. While their cities eventually fell to empires like Assyria and Rome, their influence persisted. Carthage, the jewel of the Phoenician colonies, rose to become a formidable power in its own right, going toe-to-toe with Rome in the Punic Wars. Even after Carthage was razed in 146 BCE, the echoes of Phoenician culture lingered in the Mediterranean, like the faint scent of cedar on a sea breeze. In the end, the Phoenicians were more than the sum of their trade goods. They were the architects of an interconnected world, proving that influence doesn't always require a throne or an army. Their legacy is a testament to the power of innovation and adaptability, qualities that allowed them to thrive in a world as unpredictable as the sea itself. They remind us that history is written not just by the conquerors, but also by those who dared to sail into the unknown. So, as we bid farewell to the Phoenicians, let's raise a glass of their finest vintage and toast to a civilization that navigated the complex currents of ancient geopolitics with skill and savvy. Their story is one of resilience and ingenuity, of myths and realities intertwining like the threads of a tapestry. It's a legacy that's both celebrated and misunderstood, leaving us with more questions than answers and a profound appreciation for the sailors who charted the course of history. Because in the grand voyage of human history, the Phoenicians were the compass that pointed us toward a connected future, proving that sometimes the greatest discoveries are found not in the stars, but in the spaces between them. The 17th century Netherlands was like that one kid in class who went from obscurity to overachiever overnight. While the rest of Europe was busy squabbling over thrones and territories, the Dutch were quietly engineering an economic miracle. Think less Game of Thrones, more Wall Street with a side of windmills. At the heart of this transformation was a unique combination of geography, innovation, and a pinch of good old-fashioned mercantile cunning. Let's start with the basics. Water. The Netherlands is essentially a country that nature never intended to exist. It's flat, marshy, and prone to flooding, basically a waterlogged nightmare. But the Dutch turned this soggy setup into a strategic advantage. Using windmills as their secret weapon, they drained swamps and reclaimed land faster than a real estate developer with a vendetta. By the mid-1600, they had thousands of these wooden giants spinning away, not just to keep their feet dry, but to power sawmills and grind grain. These windmills weren't just quaint scenery, they were the engines of an economic revolution. Speaking of revolutions, let's talk trade, the real MVP of the Dutch Golden Age. The Dutch East India Company, or Verenigd Oostindische Compagnie, VARC, if you're feeling fancy, was the world's first multinational corporation, and more impressively, the first company to issue stock. Founded in 1602, the VOC was a juggernaut of capitalistic ambition, with a fleet of ships that made Amazon's delivery network look like a joke. They weren't just shipping spices and silks, they were exporting an entire economic model. This company became so powerful it could wage war, negotiate treaties, and even mint its own currency. It was like the Amazon, Apple, and Pentagon of its day rolled into one. The VOC's success was not just about gutsy governance and a knack for navigation. It was a testament to Dutch financial wizardry. Amsterdam became the world's financial hub, with the establishment of the Amsterdam Stock Exchange in 1602, basically the Wall Street of the 17th century. Suddenly, anyone with a few guilders and a dream could buy a piece of the action. It was capitalism unchained, and with it came a flurry of speculative ventures and risky investments, which brings us to the infamous tulip mania. Now, before you roll your eyes at the thought of flowers causing financial chaos, remember that in 1636-37, a single tulip bulb could cost you the equivalent of a luxury townhouse in Amsterdam. Yes, you heard that right. At the peak of this botanical bonanza, a particularly rare tulip bulb, like the Semper Augustus, was reportedly sold for 10,000 guilders. For context, a skilled craftsman might earn 300 guilders a year. So, you do the math. People were trading these bulbs like they were gold-plated Fabergé eggs, all for the chance to show off a flower that only bloomed for a week. This wasn't just about tulips. It was about the intoxicating allure of getting rich quick, the same siren song that would later lure people into dot-com bubbles and Bitcoin bonanzas. Tulip mania was the OG economic bubble, and like all bubbles, it ended with a pop. By February 1637, the market crashed spectacularly. Prices plummeted, fortunes were lost, and the tulip went from a symbol of status to a cautionary tale. Imagine the hangover of a nation waking up to realize they'd bet the farm on a flower. But what made the Dutch Golden Age truly golden wasn't just their financial acumen or horticultural hysteria. It was their ability to innovate and adapt. Amsterdam's merchants weren't just savvy, they were visionaries, creating a new world order of trade and finance. They understood the power of global networks long before the internet made it cool. And while the rest of Europe was stuck in their feudal ways, the Dutch were busy building a modern economy on the back of tulip bulbs and spice routes. Of course, this success didn't come without a cost. The wealth of the Golden Age was built on the backs of colonies and exploited labor. The VOC's profits were stained with the blood of countless indigenous peoples and slaves. It's a sobering reminder that behind the romantic tale of windmills and tulips lies a harsher reality. The very systems that made the Netherlands a powerhouse also sowed the seeds of global inequities that still reverberate today. So, as you drift off to sleep, ponder this. The Dutch didn't just build an economy, they engineered a revolution. Their legacy is a testament to human ingenuity and ambition, but also a cautionary tale about the price of progress. From windmills to tulip bulbs, the Dutch Golden Age was a wild ride of highs and lows, a perfect blend of brilliance and folly. And isn't that what history is all about? But let's not get misty-eyed about the Dutch Golden Age just yet. Sure, windmills, tulips, and a financial system that would make Wall Street salivate were all part of the package, but the real secret sauce. It was the Dutch knack for political savvy and social engineering, a combination that turned their tiny nation into a maritime juggernaut. Picture this, a country the size of Maryland outmaneuvering the likes of Spain and England on the high seas. That's not just impressive, it's downright audacious. First, let's talk about those savvy merchants, the real movers and shakers of this era. These were the folks who turned commerce into an art form, orchestrating a global symphony of trade routes and supply chains. They operated from Amsterdam, a city that was to the 17th century what Silicon Valley is to the 21st, an innovation hub buzzing with ideas and ambition. One of the most notable figures was Louis de Geer, a merchant with a knack for weaponry. He was the Elon Musk of his time, except instead of electric cars, he was dealing in cannons and muskets. His genius lay not just in selling arms, but in financing entire wars, thus ensuring a steady demand for his products. Talk about creating your own market. But it wasn't just about individual brilliance, it was about collective strategy. The Dutch Republic was a decentralized political entity, more akin to a modern corporation than a medieval kingdom. Instead of a single ruler, power was spread across a network of provinces and cities, each with its own interests and ambitions. This might sound like a recipe for chaos, but it fostered a culture of negotiation and compromise, which was crucial in navigating the murky waters of international trade and diplomacy. Think of it as a very sophisticated game of cat and mouse, where everyone was both predator and prey. And then there were the naval commanders, the aggressive enforcers of Dutch trade supremacy. Take Martin Tromp and Michiel de Ruyter, for instance. These guys didn't just command ships, they commanded respect. Tromp, with his flamboyant style and penchant for showmanship, was the rock star of the seas. Meanwhile, de Ruyter was the quiet genius, the chess master who outwitted his opponents with strategic finesse. Under their leadership, the Dutch navy became a force to be reckoned with, securing vital trade routes and deterring would-be aggressors. Their exploits read like action-adventure novels, complete with daring battles and high-stakes maneuvers. Yet, for all the tales of derring-do, the Dutch weren't exactly paragons of virtue. Their so-called freedom-loving image starts to tarnish when you scrutinize their colonial exploits. The Vark, hailed as a pioneer of global trade, was also a ruthless colonizer. They didn't just trade spices, they seized territories, imposed monopolies, and exploited local populations. The Banda Islands massacre in 1621 is a particularly grim chapter. When the islanders dared to trade nutmeg with the English, the VOC's Jan Pietersoen Cohen unleashed a brutal crackdown, effectively wiping out the local population to secure Dutch control. It was colonialism at its most brutal, a stark reminder that the quest for profit often came with a horrifying human cost. So, while the Dutch were busy painting pretty pictures of prosperity and progress, the reality was far more complex. Their golden age was as much about exploitation as it was about innovation. The wealth that flowed into Amsterdam's coffers was stained with the blood and sweat of those who toiled in far-off lands. It's a narrative that challenges the romanticized view of the past, forcing us to confront the uncomfortable truths behind the gilded facade. In essence, the Dutch didn't just corner the market on maritime trade. They rewrote the rules of the game. They showed that, with enough cunning and a touch of ruthlessness, even a small nation could play in the big leagues. But like every empire before and after, their rise came with a price. It's a story of ambition and avarice, of triumphs and tragedies, and of the perpetual tension between ideals and actions. As our story sails on, remember this. The Dutch Golden Age was a swirling vortex of contradictions, a testament to both the heights of human achievement and the depths of its folly. It's a tale as old as time, and yet as relevant as ever. Expect more intrigue and insight as we delve deeper into this fascinating era. Stay tuned, because the journey is far from over. The Golden Age wasn't just about ships and savvy deals. It was also about painting the town red, or at least a vibrant palette of Rembrandt ochres and Vermeer blues. You see, while the Dutch were busy conquering the high seas and stock markets, they were also orchestrating a cultural renaissance that would make any art history buff swoon. This era wasn't merely gilded with coins. It was drenched in the rich hues of artistic mastery. Rembrandt van Rijn. His name alone conjures images of shadowy portraits and dramatic lighting. Born in 1606, Rembrandt was the rock star of the art world, minus the smashed guitars and hotel room tantrums. Instead, he wielded a paintbrush with a deftness that turned the mundane into the magnificent. His iconic Night Watch, painted in 1642, wasn't just a group portrait of militiamen. It was a dynamic tapestry of light and shadow, a masterclass in chiaroscuro. And let's not forget his ability to capture the human condition with a single brushstroke. Rembrandt's works weren't just paintings, they were psychological studies wrapped in canvas. Meanwhile, Johannes Vermeer, the meticulous master of light, was busy transforming everyday life into luminous masterpieces. Born in 1632, Vermeer's oeuvre might not be as vast as Rembrandt's, but what it lacks in quantity, it makes up for in quality. Take Girl with a Pearl Earring. For instance, painted around 1665, it's often dubbed the Mona Lisa of the North. With its enigmatic gaze and shimmering earring, it's a perfect blend of mystery and simplicity, capturing a fleeting moment with timeless elegance. Vermeer didn't just paint pictures, he painted moments, frozen in time with the precision of a high-def snapshot. But before you get all misty-eyed with visions of Dutch masters, let's sprinkle a bit of reality into this artistic fairy tale. The truth is, while these artists were creating masterpieces, they weren't exactly swimming in guilders. Rembrandt, despite his fame, found himself neck-deep in debt later in life. In 1656, he declared insolvency, and his belongings, artworks included, were auctioned off to settle his accounts. Vermeer, too, faced financial hardships, dying penniless in 1675, leaving his wife and children in considerable debt. It's a sobering reminder that while their canvases were rich, their pockets often were not. On the surface, the Dutch Golden Age paints a picture of harmony between commerce and culture, but dig a little deeper, and you'll find the city's gritty underbelly. Amsterdam, the heart of this cultural renaissance, was a bustling metropolis teeming with life, but it wasn't all artistic salons and bohemian gatherings. The city streets were a cacophony of languages, smells, and social classes, a melting pot of opportunity and exploitation. The city's picturesque canals, now the Instagram backdrop of choice, were originally the arteries of commerce, crucial for transport and trade. Built in the early 17th century, this intricate network facilitated the movement of goods and people, effectively transforming Amsterdam into one of Europe's busiest ports. But these waterways also had a less glamorous side. They doubled as open sewers, often filled with waste and debris. Romantic gondola rides, not quite, more like navigating a floating landfill with an aroma to match. The urban landscape was a reflection of the society that inhabited it, both progressive and precarious. Amsterdam was a haven for those seeking religious and intellectual freedom, yet it was also a hotbed of inequality. The same canals that carried the wealth of the world also encapsulated the stark divide between the haves and the have-nots. The opulent homes of the merchant elite stood in stark contrast to the cramped, squalid quarters of the working class. The city was a living paradox, where prosperity and poverty rubbed shoulders on a daily basis. And let's not forget the city's thriving red-light district, a testament to Amsterdam's liberal ethos. Prostitution was not only tolerated but regulated, providing a steady income for many women. It was a gritty reality that coexisted with the city's lofty ideals, a reminder that Amsterdam was as much a city of vice as it was of virtue. In this complex tapestry of wealth and want, art and commerce, Amsterdam was a city that defied simple definitions. It was a place where Rembrandt's masterpieces could share space with merchant ledgers, where Vermeer's serene interiors contrasted with the chaotic energy of the streets. The Dutch Golden Age was a time of contradictions, where the sublime mingled with the sordid, creating a vibrant mosaic that still captivates us today. As we sail through this cultural renaissance, remember, the real beauty of the Golden Age lies not just in its art or its achievements, but in its complexity. It's a story of light and shadow, of highs and lows, much like the paintings that emerged from this era. And as we continue our journey through this fascinating chapter in history, keep your eyes peeled for more tales of triumph and turmoil, because the Dutch Golden Age is far from finished with its surprises. As we sail through this cultural renaissance, remember, the real beauty of the Golden Age lies not just in its art or its achievements, but in its complexity. Speaking of complexity, let's dive into the labyrinthine world of the Dutch financial system, a system so intricate it could make even the most seasoned Wall Street trader break into a sweat. First, let's talk about the Amsterdam Stock Exchange, the granddaddy of all stock markets. Founded in 1602, this was where the magic, or mayhem, depending on your luck, happened. It was the first official stock exchange, a buzzing hive of commerce and speculation, where merchants, investors, and speculators gathered in a frenzy of buying and selling. Picture the trading floor as a chaotic bazaar where fortunes were made and lost with the flick of a quill. This was capitalism in its rawest form, complete with all the thrills and spills. The genius of the Amsterdam Stock Exchange wasn't just in its ability to trade shares. It was in how it democratized financial opportunities. Suddenly, anyone with a few guilders and a dose of daring could own a piece of a trading venture, like the now infamous VOC. This wasn't just about moving money. It was about creating a financial ecosystem that laid the groundwork for modern banking and finance. In fact, the practices and principles established here would later echo down Wall Street's canyons, shaping the global economy in ways that even the most ambitious Dutch merchant couldn't have imagined. Now, let's peel back the layers of the VOC, or the Dutch East India Company, that titan of trade and prototype for multinational corporations. This was the Apple and Amazon of its day, only with less tech and more spice. Founded in 1602 with the express purpose of monopolizing the valuable spice trade, the VOC was a capitalist colossus, and its business practices were as bold as they were brutal. This company didn't just trade goods, It traded power and influence across continents, with a fleet of over 150 ships at its peak. That's like having a personal army of floating warehouses, each one a cog in the vast machinery of capitalism. The numbers alone are staggering. By the mid-17th century, the VOC was paying out dividends of up to 40%, a return that would make even the most optimistic stockholder today swoon. But these impressive figures came with a darker side. The VOC's success was built on the backs of exploited labor and the ruthless suppression of competitors. The company didn't just play hardball, it played with cannonballs, using military might to enforce its monopolies in the East Indies. The Banda Islands massacre of 1621, where the VOC decimated the local population to secure control of the nutmeg trade, is a stark reminder of the lengths to which they would go for profit. Yet, despite its cutthroat practices, the VOC also pioneered innovations that would become staples of modern business. It was the first company to issue bonds and shares of stock to the general public, essentially inventing the concept of a publicly traded company. This innovation democratized investment, allowing anyone with the means to buy into the company and share in its profits. It was a financial revolution that transformed the way business was done, setting a precedent that would eventually lead to the stock markets and corporate structures we know today. But before we get too misty-eyed about the VOC as a beacon of capitalism, let's remember that it was also a cautionary tale of unchecked corporate power. By the time it was dissolved in 1799, the company was drowning in debt and corruption, a victim of its own success. It turns out that even the mightiest corporations are not immune to the pitfalls of greed and mismanagement, a lesson as relevant today as it was then. The impact of the Dutch financial system extended beyond mere commerce. It was also a catalyst for social and political change, reshaping the fabric of Dutch society. The wealth generated by the stock exchange and the VOC didn't just fill the coffers of the merchant elite. It fueled a burgeoning middle class, creating opportunities for social mobility that were rare in the rest of Europe. This newfound prosperity also fostered a culture of intellectual and artistic innovation, as the wealthy invested in education, science, and the arts. Yet this prosperity was not evenly distributed. While Amsterdam's merchant elite lived in opulent canal houses, the working class often toiled in squalid conditions. The city's financial boom was a double-edged sword, bringing both opportunity and inequality. It was a microcosm of the modern world, where the gap between rich and poor could be as wide as the canals themselves. So, as we marvel at the Dutch Golden Age, let's not forget the gritty realities that lurked beneath the surface. The financial innovations of the era were groundbreaking, but they were also grounded in a system of exploitation and inequality that echoes through history. It's a reminder that the pursuit of profit can come at a high price, a lesson that remains as relevant today as it was 4 centuries ago. As we continue our journey through this fascinating era, remember, the Dutch Golden Age was a time of contradictions, a testament to both the heights of human achievement and the depths of its folly. And as we unravel the next chapter in this intriguing tale, stay tuned for more insights and surprises, because the story of the Dutch Golden Age is far from over. So here we are, on the cusp of the Dutch Golden Age's grand finale, a story as intricate as a Rembrandt etching and just as full of shadows. The decline of this era wasn't a dramatic crash, but more of a slow unraveling, like a carefully knitted sweater steadily losing its shape. One thread pulled was the shifting sands of international politics. As the 17th century rolled into the 18th, the Dutch found themselves sandwiched between the swelling ambitions of England and France, 2 nations that could smell opportunity like a shark smells blood in water. The Anglo-Dutch Wars, 4 in total by the late 1600, were less about who could sail the prettiest ships and more about who would dominate global trade. Despite their earlier naval prowess, the Dutch struggled to keep up with England's naval expansion and industrial might. The Treaty of Westminster in 1674 ended the Third Anglo-Dutch War, but it came at the cost of New Amsterdam, which you might know today as New York City. Imagine trading one of the world's most iconic cities for the British-held Suriname, a place so mosquito-infested it could make a naturopath cringe. But it wasn't just foreign affairs that frayed the fabric of the Golden Age. Domestically, the Dutch economy was experiencing its own brand of turbulence, the kind that could make even the most optimistic speculator reach for a bottle of Geneva. Remember the tulip mania? It was just the beginning of a series of speculative bubbles that would test the resilience of Dutch capitalism. In the late 17th century, the Dutch faced a financial crisis when the French invaded during the Franco-Dutch War. The conflict drained resources and forced the Dutch to adopt heavy taxation, squeezing the life out of their once thriving economy. As if that wasn't enough, the very financial markets that had made Amsterdam the envy of the world began to wobble. The Vark, once a titan of trade, was showing signs of wear and tear. By the 18th century, it was plagued by corruption, inefficiency, and competition from emerging European powers. The company that had once issued dividends like candy on Halloween was now drowning in debt. When it finally dissolved in 1799, it left a legacy as a cautionary tale of corporate greed and mismanagement. So what does all this mean for the legacy of the Dutch Golden Age? Let's not sugarcoat it. It was an era full of contradictions. The same society that fostered groundbreaking art and financial innovation also indulged in colonial exploitation and social inequality. It's a bit like finding out your favorite rock star has a tax evasion problem. The art is still great, but the reality is a tad disappointing. Yet, despite its flaws, the Dutch Golden Age left an indelible mark on global trade and finance. Amsterdam's stock exchange laid the groundwork for modern financial markets, and the VOC's business model was a prototype for today's multinational corporations. The era's emphasis on trade and commerce created a blueprint that still influences global economic practices. If you've ever invested in a stock, or even just used a credit card, you've got a little piece of the Dutch legacy in your wallet. And let's not forget the cultural impact. Rembrandt and Vermeer may not have died rich, but their contributions enriched the world in ways that transcend coin and currency. Their works continue to inspire, reminding us that art can be both a reflection of its time and a timeless commentary on the human condition. In a way, the art of the Dutch Golden Age is its most enduring triumph, a canvas of light and shadow, capturing the paradoxes of an era that dared to dream big. So, as we close this chapter, let's raise a glass to the Dutch Golden Age, not as a flawless utopia, but as a fascinating tapestry of ambition, brilliance, and folly. It was a time of great achievements and even greater contradictions, a reminder that history is never black and white, but an ever-shifting spectrum. And as you drift off to sleep, ponder this. The legacy of the Dutch Golden Age is much like a Vermeer painting, full of light and shadow, mystery and clarity, a work in progress that continues to unfold even today. In the heart of southern Africa, where modern-day Zimbabwe now lies, something extraordinary happened around the 11th century. A kingdom emerged, one that would leave behind some of the most impressive stone ruins on the continent. Great Zimbabwe, the name both of the kingdom and its remarkable city, didn't just spring up overnight. It was the product of an intriguing mix of geography, trade, and human ambition, all wrapped up in the rich tapestry of African history. To really get into the nitty-gritty of Great Zimbabwe, we have to start with its setting. The region is a highland plateau, boasting fertile soils and an abundance of natural resources. Mother Nature played her part well, providing a landscape that was just begging for civilization to flourish. But let's not get too misty-eyed. This wasn't some kind of Eden untouched by the woes of the world. The people here had to contend with the practicalities of life, like unpredictable weather patterns and the occasional hostile neighbor. Now, if you're imagining a land bustling with zebras and lions, you're not completely off the mark. But the real gold mine was, well, gold. Great Zimbabwe sat smack dab in the middle of a gold-rich area. The Shona people, who were the brains and brawn behind this kingdom, knew the value of their golden backyard. They didn't just sit on their hands. They mined it, traded it, and built a thriving economy around it. By the 11th century, they had crafted a powerful state, central to a trade network that stretched from the Swahili coast to the far-flung markets of China and Persia. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before there was a kingdom, there were just scattered communities. Early settlers in the region, likely ancestors of the Shona, started to form more complex societies around the 4th century. They were the ones who laid the groundwork for what would eventually become Great Zimbabwe. And they weren't just about gold. These early folks were savvy farmers and herders, cultivating sorghum and millet and raising cattle. Their society was built on a mix of agriculture and trade, a classic combo that has launched many a civilization. Fast forward a few centuries, and we see the rise of the Gizo culture, a precursor to the Shona. They were already making a mark in the region, with settlements that showed a clear hierarchy. You could say they were the opening act before the main event of Great Zimbabwe. These Gizo communities were trading with the Indian Ocean coast, exchanging ivory and gold for beads and cloth. They were also starting to build with stone, a skill that would reach its zenith in Great Zimbabwe. Ah, the stone. Ruins of Great Zimbabwe are a testament to the architectural genius of its people. But we're not quite there yet. Let's talk about the myths first, because every great kingdom has its legends. One of the most persistent stories is that Great Zimbabwe was built by outsiders, perhaps Phoenicians or Hebrews. This myth was so popular among European explorers and colonizers that it stuck around for centuries. It's a classic case of surely locals couldn't have done this, as patronizing as it is false. The truth is far more fascinating. The Shona were skilled builders, and they didn't need any help from ancient mariners from across the seas. Around the 11th century, they started constructing stone structures that would become the trademark of Great Zimbabwe. These weren't just any old piles of rocks. We're talking about carefully laid stone walls, some as high as 11 meters. That's about 36 feet for the metrically challenged, constructed without mortar. The great enclosure, the most famous of these structures, is an architectural marvel that still baffles experts today. So why stone? Well, stone is durable, impressive, and sends a clear message. We're here, we're powerful, and we're not going anywhere. It was also a way to display wealth and status. The elites of Great Zimbabwe knew that stone structures would stand the test of time, making a statement that outlasted their own lifetimes. And while the myths might have painted these builders as foreigners, the reality is that the Shona were perfectly capable of such feats. They were master craftsmen, using local granite to create something that would endure long after their kingdom had faded. But let's not get too caught up in the stones and forget about the socio-political climate. The Shona society was organized into a hierarchy, with a king at the top, followed by nobles, commoners, and slaves. The king, or Mambo, wielded considerable power, both in spiritual and earthly matters. This was a society that placed a high value on ancestry and lineage, and the king was seen as a divine figure, a living connection to the spirits of the land. The political structure was supported by a network of chiefs, each overseeing their own territories. This decentralized system allowed Great Zimbabwe to expand its influence far and wide, without the need for constant direct control. It was a clever setup that allowed for flexibility and adaptation, key ingredients for any successful empire. So, there you have it. The stage is set for the rise of Great Zimbabwe, a kingdom born from a perfect storm of geography, resources, and human ingenuity. It's a story of resilience and ambition, of myths debunked and realities embraced. And while the stones may be silent now, they still have plenty of stories to tell. As we continue to explore the rise of this fascinating kingdom, remember, history is never just about what happened. It's about why it mattered and the legacy it left behind. And speaking of stories, the stones of Great Zimbabwe have plenty to tell, and not just about the people who built them, but the sheer ambition it took to stack those rocks sky high. Let's dig into the architectural wonders themselves, because, honestly, these structures are the rock stars of African history. Pun absolutely intended. First up, let's talk construction techniques. Forget your modern cement mixers and fancy cranes. The Shona builders used nothing but gravity and geometry. Picture this. Enormous walls constructed without a speck of mortar, standing tall and proud for centuries. The stones, carefully cut from local granite, were laid in an interlocking pattern that'd make a jigsaw puzzle look like child's play. Each piece was carved and placed with precision. No room for shoddy workmanship here. These builders were the kings of dry stone masonry, a technique as impressive as it is ancient. But before you romanticize these feats as the stuff of legend, let's inject a dose of reality. The labor behind these marvels wasn't some utopian community effort where everyone sang cumbaya while hoisting stones. This was hard, grueling work, and it's likely that a labor force, possibly including slaves, did the heavy lifting. These structures were the result of blood, sweat, and tears, and maybe a few choice words muttered under the breath of exhausted workers. Now, if you think these stones were just plopped down randomly, think again. The Great Enclosure, the piece de resistance of Great Zimbabwe, is a masterclass in design, stretching over 250 meters in circumference and boasting walls up to 11 meters high. It's the largest ancient structure south of the Sahara. Imagine the logistical nightmare of aligning thousands of stones over uneven terrain without toppling the whole thing. These folks had no blueprint, no CAD software, just sheer skill and determination. And what was the economic impact of these structures, you ask? Well, building in stone wasn't just about aesthetics or practicality. It was a power move. A stone city shouted wealth and stability in a way that a mud hut never could. It was the medieval equivalent of driving a top-of-the-line sports car or wearing the latest designer threads. The elites of Great Zimbabwe used these structures to show off their prosperity and solidify their status. No wonder the kingdom became a magnet for traders and travelers eager to cash in on the gold rush. As for the labor force, well, considering the scale and complexity of these projects, it's likely they had quite the operation going. Picture a bustling scene of laborers, artisans, and overseers, each playing a role in this grand architectural symphony. The Shona society was stratified, with a clear hierarchy that helped organize such massive undertakings. The king, or Mambo, likely wielded his power to mobilize resources and manpower. After all, nothing says, "I'm in charge," quite like a colossal stone fortress. Now let's tackle those persistent myths. There's an irresistible allure to imagining ancient mariners or lost tribes swooping in to build these structures. Sure, it makes for a great story, but the reality is far more grounded, and dare I say, inspiring. The Shona didn't need any foreign intervention to create their masterpiece. Their construction methods were homegrown, honed over generations of building with stone. So next time someone tries to sell you on the idea of Phoenician architects in southern Africa, remember, the truth is often stranger and more fascinating than fiction. Now, these stones weren't just sitting pretty. They had a function, a purpose beyond mere aesthetic. The Great Enclosure, in particular, likely served as a royal palace, a ceremonial center, or maybe even a combination of both. It was a place where the elite gathered, where decisions were made, and where power was both demonstrated and exercised. This was no mere decorative feature. It was the beating heart of the kingdom. But let's not ignore the elephant in the room, the debate about what exactly these structures were used for. Some suggest they were granaries, others propose they were religious sites, and a few even theorize they were early forms of urban planning. The truth is, we might never know the full story, and maybe that's part of the charm. These stones keep their secrets close, much like the kingdom they represent. Still, the economic implications were undeniable. Stone buildings signaled stability and attracted traders like moths to a flame. The kingdom became an economic powerhouse, its influence stretching across the continent and beyond. Yet, let's not forget, every empire has its limits. The very factors that led to Great Zimbabwe's rise, trade routes, natural resources, also made it a target for envy and conflict. The kingdom's fortunes were as much about external connections as they were about internal dynamics. In the end, Great Zimbabwe stone structures are a testament to human ingenuity and determination. They tell a story of ambition, of a society that dared to dream big and build even bigger. And while the myths might try to overshadow the reality, the stones stand as a silent rebuke to such fantasies. They remind us that history is not just about the stories we tell, but about the people who lived them, who carved their legacy into the very earth they walked upon. So next time you find yourself in the midst of these ancient walls, remember the hands that placed each stone, the minds that orchestrated their arrangement, and the society that flourished because of them. These structures are more than just piles of rock. They are the echoes of a kingdom that knew its worth and wasn't afraid to show it. As we continue our journey through Great Zimbabwe's history, let's keep our eyes on the stones. They have plenty more to reveal. Now, as the echoes of Great Zimbabwe stone structures linger in our minds, let's shift gears and dive into what really made the kingdom tick, its economic engine. Spoiler alert, it wasn't just about shiny rocks and mooing cows. Sure, gold was the headliner, but the real script involved trade routes, barter systems, and a bustling economy that would make Wall Street blush. Picture this. You're a trader in 14th century Africa, your camel caravan laden with gold, ivory, and maybe a hint of attitude. You've trekked for days, navigating treacherous terrain and sweltering heat, all to reach the promised land of Great Zimbabwe. Why? Because this kingdom was the Amazon prime of its time, a hub of commerce where goods flowed like water in the Nile. Gold was the marquee product, but let's not reduce Great Zimbabwe to a one-trick pony. The kingdom's economy was a smorgasbord of commodities. Cattle herding was as integral as gold mining, providing both sustenance and status. Think of cattle as the medieval equivalent of a Swiss bank account, portable, valuable, and always a good conversation starter. Now, let's talk trade routes, the real veins pumping life into this economic heart. These weren't your garden variety paths. We're talking highways of commerce connecting the Swahili coast to far-flung empires like China and Persia. Kilwa-Kisiwani, a major port city, was a crucial link in this chain. Traders would swap gold and ivory for exotic goods like Chinese porcelain and Persian textiles. No need for a passport, just a keen sense of opportunity and maybe a bit of luck. But hold on, before you get swept away in tales of riches and exotic wares, let's inject a little reality check. These trade routes weren't all silk and spice. They were fraught with danger, from bandits and wild animals to the merciless sun. And while the notion of ancient globalization sounds romantic, it was a gritty, get-your-hands-dirty kind of affair. Traders were the ultimate hustlers, navigating not just physical landscapes, but also the complex web of politics and alliances. Now, about that barter system. Forget your coins and credit cards. Great Zimbabwe's economy thrived on the good old-fashioned art of negotiation. Gold was traded for beads, cattle for cloth, and sometimes even people for power. It was a high-stakes game of give and take, where the value of goods wasn't just determined by their market worth, but by their social and cultural significance. And speaking of people, let's not gloss over the labor force that kept this economic machine running. Mining gold and herding cattle wasn't just for the faint-hearted. It required a significant workforce, likely composed of commoners and slaves. The kingdom's hierarchy ensured that everyone knew their place, with the elite reaping the rewards, while the lower tiers did the heavy lifting. Talk about trickle-down economics in its rawest form. But before you start imagining hidden treasure troves and vaults overflowing with gold, let's dispel a few myths. The idea of untold wealth stashed away in secret chambers is as alluring as it is unlikely. The truth is, gold was a commodity, a means to an end rather than an end in itself. It was circulated, traded, and transformed, playing a crucial role in the kingdom's external relations and internal stability. So why does Great Zimbabwe's economic story matter? Because it was a testament to the kingdom's ability to adapt and thrive in a complex, interconnected world. It wasn't just about accumulating wealth. It was about using that wealth to foster relationships, build alliances, and maintain a balance of power. The kingdom's economic prowess was as much about survival as it was about success, and therein lies the real legacy of Great Zimbabwe. It's not just the stones or the gold, but the intricate dance of economy, society, and politics that propelled this kingdom onto the stage of history. As we continue to unravel the story of this fascinating civilization, remember, it's not just about what they built, but how they built a world that was far larger than the sum of its parts. So next time you're trying to wrap your head around the complexities of modern trade and economics, spare a thought for the traders and herders of Great Zimbabwe. They may not have had spreadsheets or stock markets, but they understood the fundamental truth of commerce. It's not just about what you have, but what you can make of it. And if that's not a lesson worth remembering, I don't know what is. As we leave the bustling markets and winding trade routes behind, there's more to uncover about Great Zimbabwe's role in the global economy. But that's a tale for another time. For now, let's take a moment to appreciate the ingenuity and ambition that turned a kingdom into a legend, one trade deal at a time. Now, as we transition from the bustling markets and intricate trade routes, let's dive headfirst into the intricate web of politics and society that kept the wheels of Great Zimbabwe turning. If you thought the kingdom's architecture and economy were impressive, wait till you hear about the political chess game that was playing out behind the scenes. Imagine the political structure of Great Zimbabwe as a grand soap opera, complete with power struggles, divine kings, and a supporting cast of chiefs and advisors. At the top of this hierarchy sat the Mambo, or king, who wasn't just your run-of-the-mill ruler. Oh no, this guy was practically a rock star. He was seen as a divine figure, the intermediary between the spiritual and earthly realms, a position that required both charisma and cunning. But let's not romanticize the Mambo's role too much. Sure, he had power, but it wasn't absolute. In the grand tradition of power dynamics everywhere, the king's authority was as much about perception as it was about actual control. He relied heavily on a network of chiefs who managed their own territories, ensuring that the kingdom's influence spread far and wide. Think of it as a decentralized system, like a medieval version of federalism, minus the constitutional conventions. These chiefs, or headmen, were the king's eyes and ears. They collected tribute, managed local disputes, and kept the peace. But don't be fooled into thinking they were just the king's lackeys. They had their own ambitions and interests, often acting as power brokers in their own right. And while the king was the figurehead, the realpolitik of Great Zimbabwe meant that he had to keep these chiefs happy or face the consequences. Now, let's talk about the narrative of absolute power. It's a popular trope in history, the idea of a mighty ruler wielding unchecked authority. But in the case of Great Zimbabwe, the reality was more nuanced. The king's power was as much about maintaining delicate alliances as it was about issuing decrees. His rule depended on the loyalty and cooperation of his chiefs, who could just as easily turn against him if they felt their interests were threatened. Sound familiar? It's a tale as old as time, one that echoes through the corridors of power even today. And speaking of loyalty, let's not forget the role of spirituality in cementing the king's authority. The Shona people placed a high value on ancestry and lineage, and the Mambo was seen as a direct descendant of the spirits who governed the land. This connection to the divine gave the king a certain mystique, a spiritual legitimacy that bolstered his earthly power. It was a clever way of ensuring that questioning the king's authority was akin to questioning the will of the ancestors, a risky move in any society. But before you get swept away by the drama of kings and chiefs, let's pause to appreciate the role of community organization. The people of Great Zimbabwe weren't just passive subjects. They played an active role in shaping their society. From laborers and artisans to traders and farmers, each person had a part to play in the kingdom's success. It was a society built on cooperation and mutual benefit, where the whole was definitely greater than the sum of its parts. And here's where things get really interesting. The concept of power in Great Zimbabwe wasn't just about who sat on the throne. It was about the intricate dance of alliances and relationships, the balancing act of interests and ambitions. It's a story of political maneuvering that would make even the most seasoned diplomat break out in a cold sweat. But let's not ignore the elephant in the room, the myth of the benevolent king. History loves to paint rulers as either tyrants or saints, but the truth is often somewhere in between. The Mambo was a ruler, yes, but he was also a man of his time, navigating the complex realities of power and politics. He had to be strategic, balancing the needs of his people with the demands of his chiefs, all while maintaining his own position at the top. And while we're debunking myths, let's tackle the romantic notion of a harmonious society where everyone lived in perfect unity. The reality was far more complex. Great Zimbabwe was a hierarchical society, with clear distinctions between the elite and the commoners. Social mobility was limited, and the lines of division were as rigid as the stone walls that defined the city. It was a society where power and privilege were concentrated at the top, a reflection of the broader dynamics at play. So why does all this matter? Because the story of Great Zimbabwe is not just about stones and gold. It's about the people who lived and breathed within its walls. It's about the power struggles and alliances that shaped their world, the social dynamics that defined their lives. It's a story of human ambition and ingenuity, of a society that dared to dream big and build even bigger. And as we continue to unravel the tale of this fascinating kingdom, remember, history is never just about what happened. It's about why it mattered and the legacy it left behind. The political and social dynamics of Great Zimbabwe offer a window into the complexities of power and society, a reminder that the past is never as simple as it seems. So, as we leave the political intrigue and social hierarchies behind, there's more to explore about the kingdom's internal dynamics. But that's a story for another time. For now, let's take a moment to appreciate the intricate web of relationships and power plays that kept great Zimbabwe thriving. It's a testament to the resilience and adaptability of a society that knew its worth and wasn't afraid to claim it. As we prepare to delve deeper into the story of great Zimbabwe, let's keep our eyes on the people who made it all possible, the rulers and the ruled, the powerful and the powerless. They may be long gone, but their legacy lives on in the stones and stories they left behind. And if that's not a tale worth telling, I don't know what is. So, as we prepare to delve deeper into the story of great Zimbabwe, let's keep our eyes on the people who made it all possible, the rulers and the ruled, the powerful and the powerless. They may be long gone, but their legacy lives on in the stones and stories they left behind. And if that's not a tale worth telling, I don't know what is. But here's the twist in our historical drama. Every rise comes with its own set of challenges, and great Zimbabwe was no exception. Fast forward to the 15th century, and this once thriving kingdom was showing signs of wear and tear. You know, like a rock star who's been on tour a little too long. So, what went wrong? Why did this powerhouse start to crumble? Well, let's dig in. First on the list of suspects, we have overpopulation. By the peak of its glory, great Zimbabwe was buzzing with life. Estimates suggest the population might have hit around 18,000. Now, that doesn't sound like much compared to today's megacities, but for a medieval African kingdom, that's like having a sold-out stadium concert every day. This population boom brought with it the usual suspects: increased demand for resources, pressure on agriculture, and of course, a whole lot of garbage. It's the age-old story of too many people and not enough room to swing a cat. Then there's resource depletion. The kingdom's success was largely built on its natural bounty: gold, cattle, fertile lands. But as they say, nothing lasts forever. Gold veins were drying up, grazing lands were overused, and soil fertility was on a downward spiral. It's like running out of your favorite coffee pods during a Monday morning rush. Not a good look for a kingdom that relied heavily on these resources to fuel its economy and feed its people. Now, let's throw another curveball into the mix: climate change. No, not the kind with polar bears and melting ice caps, but a medieval version of climate shenanigans. Around the 15th century, the region experienced significant shifts in rainfall patterns. Droughts became more frequent, making agriculture a game of Russian roulette. For a society that depended on farming and livestock, this was a blow that hit harder than a bad review on opening night. But wait, there's more. The factors of decline weren't just environmental or economic. There were social and political frictions as well. The kingdom's decentralized system, once its strength, began to show cracks. Chiefs and local leaders, perhaps sensing the weakening grip of the central authority, started flexing their muscles a little too much. This internal power struggle wasn't exactly conducive to a stable, united front. It was more of a Game of Thrones kind of scenario, minus the dragons, but with all the drama. By the late 15th century, the powerful kingdom of Mutapa had emerged to the north, drawing away trade and influence. The allure of new opportunities elsewhere must have felt like the medieval equivalent of a startup offering better perks and a cooler office space. Traders and artisans packed their bags, leaving the once bustling hub of great Zimbabwe in search of greener pastures. So, with all these factors playing a part, great Zimbabwe gradually declined. By the time Portuguese traders arrived on the scene in the early 16th century, they found the great city mostly deserted, its stone structures silent witnesses to a bygone era. The kingdom that had once been a beacon of trade and culture was now a relic, its glory days preserved only in the tales of those who remembered. Now, if you're thinking this is just another sad tale of rise and fall, think again. The legacy of great Zimbabwe is far more than the sum of its ruins. The stones, though silent, speak volumes about human ingenuity, resilience, and the complexities of building a civilization in an ever-changing world. They tell us about a society that knew how to harness its resources, navigate the intricacies of trade, and wield power in a way that left an indelible mark on history. And what about those myths? The idea that outsiders must have built such a sophisticated society is not just a footnote in history. It's a reminder of the biases that have often clouded our understanding of Africa's past. The truth is, Great Zimbabwe was a homegrown marvel, a testament to the talents and ambitions of the Shona people. It's a story that challenges the narratives spun by early explorers and invites us to look beyond the myth to appreciate the real achievements of this remarkable civilization. As we wrap up this journey through the rise and fall of Great Zimbabwe, let's take a moment to reflect on the lessons it offers. In today's world, where climate change, resource management, and population pressures are as relevant as ever, the story of Great Zimbabwe serves as both a cautionary tale and a source of inspiration. It reminds us that civilizations rise and fall not just because of their leaders or their wealth, but because of how they adapt to change, how they balance the needs of their people with the demands of their environment. So, next time you find yourself pondering the complexities of modern society, spare a thought for the people of Great Zimbabwe. They may have lived centuries ago, but their challenges and triumphs continue to resonate today. And if there's one thing we can learn from their story, it's that history is not just about what happened. It's about what it teaches us about ourselves, our world, and the legacies we leave behind. And there you have it, the tale of Great Zimbabwe, an epic saga of ambition, ingenuity, and resilience, set against the backdrop of a changing world. Whether you're inspired by its achievements or cautioned by its decline, one thing is certain. The stones of Great Zimbabwe have stories to tell, and they're worth listening to. In the dusty corners of the 6th century BCE, a time when most folks were content with myths about gods throwing lightning bolts, a handful of curious Greeks started questioning everything from the origins of the universe to why they had to wear those toga-like chittens. This was the audacious birth of Greek philosophy, a movement that would forever alter the course of Western thought. And if you think today's skeptics ask tough questions, wait until you hear about this philosophical squad. First up, meet Thales of Miletus, who around 585 BCE decided he wasn't satisfied with the gods' did-it explanation for natural phenomena. Thales was a man obsessed with water, not in a stay-hydrated kind of way, but in a cosmic sense. He proposed that water was the fundamental substance of all things. Picture him, a proto-scientist, peering into the sea as if trying to unlock its secrets. While his idea might sound like the ramblings of someone who took drink 8 glasses a day too seriously, it was revolutionary. Thales was daring to replace myth with reason, suggesting that the universe could be understood through observation and logic. Sure, he might have been a bit off, spoiler. The universe isn't just H2O, but let's give the guy credit for trying to answer questions with more than just Zeus did it. Next in line was Anaximander, Thales' protege, who took his master's watery musings and decided to one-up him. Anaximander wasn't content with just one element. He proposed something called the aperon, an infinite, boundless substance from which everything sprang. If Thales was the guy who thought water was the answer to life's mysteries, Anaximander was the one who said, "Hold my wine cup. It's more complicated than that." He sketched the first known map of the world. Yes, on a flat surface, long before flat-earthers made it a thing, and introduced the idea of evolution way before Darwin was a twinkle in his great-great-great-grandparents' eyes. Anaximander's abstract thinking pushed philosophy into uncharted waters, and while the aperon didn't stick around in the annals of scientific theory, it opened doors to a universe of possibilities beyond what could be seen or touched. Then there was Pythagoras, the man who took numbers and gave them a mystical aura. Around 570 BCE, he founded a cult-like community where mathematics was both a science and a religion. Pythagoras and his followers believed numbers were the essence of all things, a concept as mind-bending as his famous theorem about right-angled triangles. You might remember sweating over that theorem in high school, cursing Pythagoras under your breath. But back in the day, his theories were groundbreaking. For Pythagoras, mathematics wasn't just about solving equations. It was a way to understand the universe's harmony. He even thought the stars sang a celestial symphony, a cosmic playlist you couldn't hear but supposedly existed. Pythagoras' obsession with numbers laid the groundwork for much of Western science and philosophy, proving that sometimes math really is the language of the universe. Just ask any college undergrad cramming for calculus. Now, let's bust a few myths. While it's tempting to imagine these philosophers sitting around sipping wine and having enlightened chats about the cosmos, their ideas weren't immediately embraced. In fact, they were often seen as oddballs. Many Greeks preferred the comfort of their traditional myths, where the world was neatly explained by divine drama and heroes with unpronounceable names. But these early philosophers were planting seeds of critical thinking that would bloom centuries later, influencing everyone from Socrates to Stephen Hawking. The reason these early thinkers were so pivotal lies in their method. They dared to use reason and observation, setting a precedent for scientific inquiry. This was a radical departure from the norm, a world where explanations were usually wrapped in the colorful cloak of mythology. By questioning myths and proposing natural, observable phenomena as explanations, these philosophers were, in many ways, the original scientific rebels. They weren't just talking about the world. They were trying to understand it, laying the intellectual foundation for centuries of Western thought. So, the next time you find yourself pondering life's big questions or grappling with a math problem, tip your hat to Thales, Anaximander, and Pythagoras. They were the original thinkers who dared to ask, what if? In a world that had always answered, because the gods said so. Their legacy is a testament to the power of curiosity and skepticism, proving that sometimes the most profound discoveries come from those willing to challenge the status quo, even if it means starting with triangles. Enter Socrates, the original troll of ancient Athens, but with a sharper mind and fewer cat memes. Socrates, who strutted around Athens in the late 5th century BCE, was the guy who could turn any conversation into a Socratic seminar. His superpower, asking questions that made people want to pull their hair out, or at least pause for an awkward silence. Picture him as that friend who won't let you get away with a simple, "I'm fine," when they really want to hear about your existential crisis. Socrates wasn't interested in spoon-feeding answers. He wanted to provoke thought. He was like a human question mark, constantly challenging Athenians to rethink their assumptions. It's no wonder he became a giant pain for many in Athens, a city that valued tradition almost as much as it did olives. Now, let's debunk a myth. Socrates didn't write anything down, not a single scroll. His ideas come to us primarily through the writings of his star pupil, Plato, and others like Xenophon. It's like trying to piece together a podcast from transcripts written by fans. Socrates' method, which we now call the Socratic method, shocking right, involved asking a series of probing questions to help people discover their own ignorance. Imagine a Twitter debate where instead of 280-character zingers, you get hit with relentless questioning until you doubt your own existence. This method wasn't just philosophical navel-gazing. It was a revolutionary approach to education and discourse, emphasizing dialogue over dogma. Socrates was all about the process, not the destination, a bit like enjoying a road trip, instead of just focusing on getting to the destination. But here's the kicker. His questioning made him a lot of enemies. Socrates' penchant for challenging authority and encouraging young men to think for themselves eventually led to his trial in 399 BCE. The charges, corrupting the youth and impiety. It was a classic case of the establishment doesn't like you questioning the rules. In a world where the gods were omnipresent and occasionally petty, questioning them was a risky business. The trial was a spectacle, with Socrates defending himself in a way that was both bold and, some might say, a bit too cheeky for his own good. He was sentenced to death, a verdict he accepted with a stoic grace that would leave even the most zen of Instagram influencers in awe. He downed a cup of hemlock with the same calm demeanor he had when asking his relentless questions, leaving a legacy that would echo through the ages. Enter Plato, the student who would turn his mentor's questioning into a philosophical empire. Plato was the ultimate fanboy who took Socrates' dialogues and ran with them, founding the academy in Athens around 387 BCE, a place where the world's first philosophy majors could gather and argue about everything from ethics to metaphysics. Plato was obsessed with the idea of ideal forms, a concept that suggests everything in our world is merely a shadow of a perfect, eternal form. Think of it as the ultimate Instagram filter, making everything in our messy reality look like a poor imitation. Plato's Republic, one of his most famous works, explores the idea of a just society led by philosopher kings, because who better to rule than those who spent their days pondering the nature of justice? It's a tantalizing idea, but one that also suggests a world where intellectuals hold all the power. Plato's idealism can be maddening and inspiring in equal measure. His theory of forms gave Western civilization a philosophical migraine and a framework for understanding abstract concepts. Plato envisioned a world where the mind's eye could see beyond the shadows of the cave, a metaphor that has sparked countless debates and interpretations. And then there's Aristotle, Plato's student, who took one look at Plato's ideal forms and said, "Cool story, bro, but let's talk reality." Aristotle was the pragmatist to Plato's idealist, focusing on the observable world. Born in 384 BCE in Stagira, a small town in northern Greece, Aristotle was a polymath who dabbled in everything from biology to politics. If there was a question to be asked, Aristotle had an answer, or at least a hypothesis. He was the ancient world's version of a Renaissance man, long before the Renaissance was even a thing. Aristotle's logic and empirical approach laid the groundwork for scientific inquiry. While Plato was dreaming of perfect forms, Aristotle was categorizing everything he could get his hands on, from plants to political systems. He developed a system of logic that would dominate Western thought for centuries, and his influence on fields like ethics, politics, and metaphysics is still felt today. Aristotle was all about finding the golden mean, or the desirable middle between two extremes. It's like saying, eat the cake, but maybe don't eat the whole cake. But let's not forget the political drama of the time. Athens, the cradle of democracy, was a tumultuous city-state where philosophical debates often mirrored the political tensions of the day. The Peloponnesian War, which pitted Athens against Sparta, had left the city in a state of disarray. Philosophers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle weren't just talking about abstract ideas. They were engaging with the very real political and social issues of their time. Their debates were the ancient equivalent of a Twitter feud, complete with alliances, betrayals, and the occasional public trial. It's easy to romanticize these philosophical giants as solitary sages pondering the mysteries of the universe. But the truth is far messier. They were part of a vibrant intellectual community that was as competitive as it was collaborative. Their ideas didn't emerge in a vacuum. They were shaped by the economic, political, and social realities of ancient Greece. The city-states were like intellectual melting pots, where ideas were traded as fiercely as goods in the agora. And let's talk numbers. Athens was a bustling city with a population of around 300,000, including slaves and foreigners. The economy was driven by trade, and the wealth generated by Athens' vast network of colonies funded its cultural and intellectual pursuits. This economic prosperity provided the leisure time necessary for philosophical inquiry, a luxury not afforded to everyone. While the philosophers were busy questioning the nature of reality, the average Athenian was more concerned with putting bread on the table. So, as we leave the golden age of Greek philosophy, we're left with a legacy that's equal parts enlightening and exasperating. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle weren't just thinkers. They were disruptors, challenging the status quo and laying the intellectual foundations for Western civilization. Their philosophical brawls were more than just academic exercises. They were battles for the soul of a society grappling with its identity amidst political upheaval. As we continue to explore their influence, remember that the next time you find yourself in a heated debate, you're participating in a tradition as old as democracy itself. Stay tuned for more philosophical fireworks in our next installment, where we'll see how these ideas evolved and spread across the ancient world. As the dust of Athens settles, we teleport to the Hellenistic period, a time when Greek philosophy gets a serious makeover. Think less toga parties, more spa retreats. The Greek Empire has expanded its borders like a college student's waistline after discovering late-night pizza. Alexander the Great, the poster child for overachievement, marches across the known world, spreading not just military might, but also Greek culture faster than a viral TikTok dance. Enter Epicurus and the Stoics, two philosophical schools that cater to the emotional roller coaster of this sprawling era like ancient self-help gurus. First up, Epicurus, the guy who decided life should feel more like a feast than a famine. Born in 341 BCE on the island of Samos, Epicurus was all about pleasure, not the hedonistic kind that involves diving into vats of wine, but the kind that comes from inner peace. He set up shop in Athens, where he founded the Garden, a philosophical commune that welcomed everyone from slaves to women, a radical notion for the times when inclusivity had the same appeal as Brussels sprouts at a toddler's birthday party. Epicurus preached that the key to happiness was simple living and the pursuit of modest pleasures, a philosophical buffet of good friends, self-reflection, and a side order of intellectual banter. He believed in ataraxia, a state of serene calmness where the biggest worry is whether you've watered your fig trees. Oddly enough, this pursuit of happiness didn't involve bucket lists or adrenaline-fueled adventures, but rather a life free from pain and fear, especially the fear of gods. Epicurus essentially told people, stop worrying about the gods. They're not worried about you, debunking the myth that divinities spent their days plotting human misery like soap opera villains. Meanwhile, the Stoics were stepping in with a philosophical chill pill for those overwhelmed by the chaos of the world. Founded by Zeno of Citium around 300 BCE, Stoicism was like the ancient world's version of a mindfulness app. Zeno, originally a wealthy merchant from Cyprus, found himself in Athens after a shipwreck. Talk about a career pivot. Setting up camp on the Stoa Poikile, a painted porch in Athens, Zeno attracted followers with ideas that resonated with a populace feeling like life was a series of unpredictable plot twists. Stoicism taught that the way to true happiness was accepting the moment as it presents itself, not as you wish it to be. It's the philosophical equivalent of loving that one weird uncle despite his conspiracy theories about the moon landing. Stoics believed in living in accordance with nature and reason, emphasizing virtue as the highest good. Imagine a life where you remain unfazed when someone cuts you off in traffic because, hey, that's the universe's will. They weren't advocating for emotional numbness, but rather an understanding that while you can't control the outside world, you can control your reaction to it. Stoicism's appeal was its practicality in a world that often felt like it was spinning off its axis. These schools of thought spread across the Mediterranean like philosophical memes, picking up followers in cities from Alexandria to Rome. In fact, by the time Rome hit its stride, both Epicureanism and Stoicism had been woven into the cultural fabric like philosophical embroidery. Roman intellectuals like Seneca and Marcus Aurelius would later adopt Stoicism, giving it a Latin makeover that appealed to Roman sensibilities. It's like taking a Greek salad and adding a dash of Italian dressing, familiar, yet with a local twist. Now, let's debunk the myth of the toga-wearing philosopher as the eternal wise sage. While it's easy to romanticize these thinkers as serene sages deep in contemplation, the reality was less picturesque. Philosophers were often embroiled in debates that were as much about ego as they were about ideas. Picture a philosophical gladiator match, where words are the weapons and intellectual one-upmanship is the prize. The toga, by the way, was more of a Roman fashion statement than a Greek staple, though it's hard to resist the iconic image of a philosopher with a flowing robe and a beard that screamed wisdom. In truth, these philosophers were navigating a world as tumultuous as our own, juggling politics, economics, and social pressures. For instance, the Hellenistic period was marked by the rise and fall of empires, economic shifts, and cultural exchanges that made the Mediterranean a cosmopolitan melting pot. Alexandria, with its famed library and lighthouse, became a hub of learning and commerce, where scholars could debate the finer points of philosophy while trading silks and spices. The region's economy was bolstered by trade routes that spanned continents, bringing wealth and ideas that fueled both intellectual and material prosperity. Yet, for all the philosophical musings on happiness and virtue, the average citizen faced a more grounded reality. Daily life was a balancing act between surviving and thriving, with philosophical insights offering solace or escape from the grind. The gap between the philosophers and the populace wasn't just intellectual, but also economic, a reminder that while ideas can be transformative, they often leave the practicalities to those living them. So, as we leave this chapter of history, remember that Greek philosophy wasn't just a series of abstract theories floating in the ether. It was a living, breathing force that shaped lives, informed choices, and influenced cultures across centuries. The ideas of Epicurus and the Stoics continue to resonate, offering a lens through which we can view our own modern dilemmas. Whether you're seeking tranquility or grappling with the chaos of the world, there's a bit of ancient wisdom waiting to be unearthed, proving that while the world changes, the big questions remain the same. Stay tuned as we journey further into the influence of these philosophical giants and their enduring legacy in the next installment. As we plunge headfirst into the Middle Ages, it's like Greek philosophy has swiped left on Europe and matched with the Arab world. Picture it. The so-called Dark Ages in Europe were, ironically, a time when the lights were shining brightly in cities like Baghdad and Cordoba. While Europe was busy with its medieval squabbles and trying to figure out how to not burn dinner over an open flame, the Arab world was having a renaissance of its own, centuries before the Europeans borrowed the term. Enter the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. Think of it as the ultimate intellectual clubhouse of the 9th century, a place where scholars gathered to translate, preserve, and expand upon the works of ancient philosophers like Aristotle and Plato. This was an era when the Islamic world was a beacon of learning, proving that knowledge was indeed the coolest currency around. With scholars like Al-Kindi, Al-Farabi, and Avicenna leading the charge, Greek philosophy was given a new lease on life, translated into Arabic and mingled with Islamic thought like a philosophical cocktail. Now, let's talk about Avicenna, or Ibn Sina, if you're feeling authentic. Born in 980 CE in what is now Uzbekistan, he was the kind of polymath who makes everyone else look like they're slacking. Avicenna wrote over 400 works, dabbling in everything from medicine to metaphysics. His canon of medicine was the go-to medical text for centuries, a sort of medieval Web MD minus the hypochondria. Avicenna took Aristotle's teachings and gave them a fresh spin, blending them with Islamic philosophy to create something entirely new. His influence was enormous, spreading across the Islamic world and eventually seeping back into Europe like ink on parchment. Meanwhile, over in Cordoba, Spain, another intellectual powerhouse was in full swing. The city was part of Al-Andalus, a Muslim-ruled region that was a melting pot of cultures. Jews, Christians, and Muslims living in a relative harmony that would make modern-day coexistence advocates weep with envy. Here, the philosopher Averroes, Ibn Rushd, was making waves. Born in 1126, Averroes was a big fan of Aristotle, and by big fan, I mean he wrote extensive commentaries on Aristotle's works, making them accessible to both the Islamic world and eventually the Latin-speaking scholars of Europe. Averroes argued that reason and faith weren't mutually exclusive, a debate that would echo through the ages like a stubborn earworm. While the Arab world was busy being the intellectual heavyweight champion of the medieval world, Europe was slowly waking from its philosophical slumber. The Crusades, those infamous military campaigns that were as much about plunder as they were about piety, acted as a catalyst for cultural exchange. As European knights returned home with more than just battle scars, they brought back knowledge, including those precious translations of Greek philosophical texts. It's as if Europe raided the world's biggest library and finally remembered to return the books. And so, by the 12th century, Europe found itself amidst a philosophical revival, often referred to as the 12th century Renaissance. A mini-Renaissance, if you will, that paved the way for the big one a few centuries later. Monasteries became centers of learning, with monks laboriously copying manuscripts by hand, ensuring that the wisdom of the ancients wasn't lost to the sands of time or the whims of a careless librarian. This was before the printing press, remember, so each book was a labor of love and a lot of ink stains. Enter Thomas Aquinas, the medieval thinker who decided Aristotle needed a new spin. Born in 1225, Aquinas was the philosopher-theologian hybrid who became the poster boy for scholasticism, a method of learning that sought to reconcile faith with reason. Aquinas' magnum opus, the Summa Theologica, is the kind of dense work that could double as a doorstop, but it was revolutionary. He took Aristotle's philosophy and wove it into the fabric of Christian theology, arguing that reason and faith were two sides of the same coin. Aquinas was like the DJ remixing an old track, giving it a new beat and making it relevant for a medieval audience. But let's not romanticize it too much. The Middle Ages weren't exactly a golden age of enlightenment for everyone. While scholars were busy debating the finer points of metaphysics, the average peasant was more concerned with surviving another winter and avoiding the local feudal lord's tax collector. Europe's economy was a patchwork quilt of feudal obligations and agricultural toil, with most people living in rural communities where the biggest philosophical question was often to plough or not to plough. Yet, despite the harsh realities of medieval life, the seeds planted by thinkers like Aquinas were ready to bloom. By the time the Renaissance rolled around, Europe was primed for a cultural explosion that would bring Greek philosophy back into the spotlight. It was as if the intellectual mixtape that started with Thales and his watery musings had been remixed and remastered, ready for a comeback tour that would influence everything from art to science. In Florence, the Medici family was busy bankrolling artists and thinkers, turning the city into a hotbed of innovation. Greek philosophy, once relegated to dusty scrolls, was now being discussed in the vibrant intellectual circles that were the Renaissance equivalent of a TED talk. The works of Plato and Aristotle inspired artists like Leonardo da Vinci and thinkers like Galileo, proving that while the Dark Ages may have been a dim chapter, the light of knowledge never truly went out. So, as Europe stepped into the Renaissance, it did so with a philosophical toolkit that had been honed over centuries, influenced by cultures as diverse as they were distant. The ideas of the Greeks, preserved by the Arab scholars and reintroduced to Europe, became the bedrock upon which modern Western thought was built. Stay tuned as we explore how these ideas continue to evolve, influencing everything from the scientific revolution to the Enlightenment, proving that good philosophy, like a great mixtape, never goes out of style. The Renaissance was like a cultural espresso shot for Europe, waking it from a medieval slumber and setting the stage for the Enlightenment. With Greek philosophy back in the intellectual driver's seat, it was time for thinkers like John Locke and Voltaire to take the wheel and steer Western civilization into the modern age. But before we get carried away with the grandeur of the Enlightenment, let's cut through the mist and shine a light on how ancient Greek philosophy laid the groundwork for this seismic shift in thought. John Locke, born in 1632, was a man who believed in tabula rasa, or the idea that the mind at birth is a blank slate. Forget predestination or divine right. Locke was all about experience shaping the individual. He was like the original "you are what you learn" advocate. His brand of empiricism was a far cry from the abstract forms of Plato or the rigid classifications of Aristotle, but it was undeniably rooted in their penchant for observation and logic. Locke's ideas on natural rights and government would go on to influence the founding fathers of the United States, proving that sometimes good philosophy is as American as apple pie, albeit with a British twist. Meanwhile, Voltaire, that sharp-tongued Frenchman born in 1694, wielded his pen with the precision of a fencing master. He was the meme king of his day, using satire to critique everything from religious intolerance to the absurdity of absolute monarchy. Voltaire's admiration for the English system, with its emphasis on personal freedoms and rational governance, was a nod to the Greek philosophical tradition of questioning authority. While Locke was busy laying down the philosophical bricks for democracy, Voltaire was the witty architect designing a society where reason reigned supreme. The Enlightenment thinkers were like intellectual magpies, picking and choosing the shiniest nuggets from Greek philosophy to create something dazzlingly new. They took the rationalism of the Greeks and supercharged it with a belief in human progress and equality, setting the stage for revolutions that would rock the world. The American Revolution in 1776 and the French Revolution in 1789 were like philosophical fireworks displays, lighting up the night with the ideas of liberty and equality that had been simmering since Socrates first asked, "What is justice?" But let's not get too carried away with visions of toga-clad philosophers guiding Enlightenment thinkers like benevolent spirits. The truth is, the legacy of Greek philosophy is as messy as it is magnificent. While we can thank the Greeks for laying the intellectual groundwork for Western civilization, we must also acknowledge their flaws. Ancient Athens, for all its philosophical glory, was a society built on the backs of slaves and women who had fewer rights than a piece of pottery. Democracy that so inspired later generations was limited to a select group of citizens, hardly the inclusive vision we cherish today. Even the philosophers themselves were far from perfect. Socrates might have been the master of the Socratic method, but he was also a gadfly who annoyed the Athenian elite to the point of earning a death sentence. Plato's ideal society in the Republic was an oligarch's dream, with philosopher kings ruling over the less enlightened masses. And Aristotle, for all his contributions to science and logic, held views on natural hierarchy that would make modern egalitarians cringe. Yet, it's precisely these imperfections that make Greek philosophy so compelling. It's a testament to the complexity of human thought that ideas born in a time of inequality and conflict could evolve into the cornerstones of modern democracy and human rights. The Greek philosophers were not infallible sages, but flawed individuals navigating a world as turbulent as our own. Their legacy is a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge is a messy, contentious affair, full of contradictions and challenges. As we wrap up this historical whirlwind tour, let's tip our hats to the ancient Greeks, not with rose-colored glasses, but with a clear-eyed appreciation for their audacity to question the world around them. Their musings echo through the corridors of time, influencing everything from our political systems to the very way we think about the world and our place in it. They were the original disruptors, proving that sometimes the most profound insights come from those willing to challenge the status quo, even if it means poking the bear or the guard of conventional wisdom. So next time you find yourself pondering life's big questions or marveling at the intricacies of modern democracy, remember that you're part of a tradition that stretches back to those curious Greeks who dared to ask, "What if?" in a world that often answered with, "Because the gods said so." Their legacy is a testament to the enduring power of curiosity and skepticism, reminding us that while the world has changed, the quest for knowledge and understanding remains as vital as ever. And with that, dear listener, we conclude our journey through the fascinating, flawed, and utterly human world of Greek philosophy and its impact on Western civilization. In 600 BCE, the Celts were not the insular, tartan-clad warriors of modern imagination, but rather Europe's ancient road warriors. Their network of trade routes spread like a spider's web, stretching across the continent from the sun-kissed shores of the Iberian Peninsula to the misty highlands of Scotland and beyond. This wasn't just about swapping shiny trinkets. It was serious business, serious enough to make any modern-day entrepreneur blush with envy. The Celts were masters of geography long before GPS was even a glint in a satellite's eye. They carved out routes that navigated through dense forests, over treacherous mountain passes, and across fast-flowing rivers. These paths were their lifelines, not just to survival, but to prosperity. Think of them as the ancient world's Amazon Prime, minus the free shipping. The commodities they traded were as diverse as they were essential. Salt was the ancient equivalent of gold dust, crucial for preserving food in a world where refrigeration was as mythical as unicorns. Tin, mined in the rugged hills of Cornwall and Brittany, was another hot commodity. It was the secret sauce in the production of bronze, the alloy that kept Celtic warriors armed to the teeth. And let's not forget slaves, human currency that greased the wheels of ancient economies, a grim reminder that history isn't all feasts and festivals. Now, onto the Druids. Ah yes, the Druids, often depicted as mystical figures with an unhealthy obsession with mistletoe and stone circles, they were rumored to wield immense influence over trade. While their role has been romanticized to the point of absurdity, thank you, Shakespeare, they did hold a certain sway. These were the folks who understood the lunar calendar better than any app on your smartphone and could predict a solar eclipse with unsettling accuracy. Their knowledge extended to the spiritual and the practical, but did they really control trade like some kind of ancient cartel? Archaeological evidence suggests they were more spiritual advisors than economic overlords, but hey, never let facts get in the way of a good yarn. Speaking of trade routes, let's take a detour down the Amber Road. This was the Silk Road's lesser-known, but equally glamorous cousin. Amber, fossilized tree resin that glows with a golden hue, was highly prized for its beauty and supposed magical properties. This route stretched from the chilly shores of the Baltic Sea down to the Adriatic and beyond, intersecting with other routes and creating a veritable highway of commerce. Forget toll booths. The only payment here was in goods or the occasional barter of knowledge. It's easy to romanticize the Celts as mystical warriors, but they were astute economists in their own right. They understood the power of trade, not just as a means to acquire goods, but as a way to forge alliances, spread culture, and influence power dynamics across Europe. Imagine them as the original networkers, with a Rolodex that spanned the known world. In this ancient game of Risk, the Celts were strategic players, always looking to expand their reach and protect their interests. Their trading networks were the lifeblood of their civilization, a testament to their adaptability and foresight. They may not have had the tech we take for granted today, but their understanding of commerce and culture was as sophisticated as any Wall Street brokers, albeit with fewer spreadsheets and more handshakes. So, next time you think of the Celts, remember them not just as warriors and wizards, but as savvy traders who helped lay the foundations for a connected Europe. Their legacy is not just in the artifacts they left behind, but in the ideas of exchange and commerce that still resonate today. They were the original deal-makers, proving that even in the Iron Age, it wasn't just about the size of your sword, but the breadth of your network. And speaking of deals, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of how the Celts kept their trade wheels spinning. You think that in a world without online banking, they'd be a bit lost, but the Celts had bartered down to an art form. Picture this, a Celtic trader standing in a bustling market, haggling over the price of a fine bronze sword by offering a bundle of furs and maybe a couple of pigs. It was a world where your word and your goods were your currency. But as much as we might romanticize the barter system as a quaint, simple way of life, let's not kid ourselves. It was a logistical nightmare. Imagine trying to determine the equivalent value of a barrel of mead against a handcrafted torque. It's enough to make a modern accountant break out in hives. Now, around 300 BCE, just as the classical world was flexing its economic muscles, the Celts decided to join the party and adopt coinage. This wasn't just a case of keeping up with the Joneses, or the Romans in this case. It was a game changer. Coinage brought a level of standardization and convenience that barter simply couldn't match. Suddenly, transactions could be made quickly, and wealth could be stored and transported more easily. This was the Iron Age equivalent of upgrading from a horse cart to a Ferrari. The coins themselves were often a mix of Greek and Roman styles, featuring intricate designs that reflected their wealth and power. It's a testament to how the Celts, ever adaptive, saw the writing on the wall and decided they wanted in on this shiny new monetary system. But the move to coinage wasn't just about convenience. It was about clout. Coins weren't just currency. They were a statement. They showcased the craftsmanship and artistic flair that Celtic artisans were famous for. Think of them as tiny, portable billboards for Celtic culture. This brings us to the economic impact of Celtic craftsmanship, which was anything but small potatoes. Their weapons and jewelry were the stuff of legend, not just because they were beautifully made, but because they were incredibly effective. Celtic swords, for example, were renowned for their quality and durability, a fact not lost on the Mediterranean markets, where demand was as high as a Roman senator's ego. Celtic jewelry, too, was a hit, with its intricate designs and use of vibrant materials. These weren't just pretty baubles. They were symbols of status and power, eagerly snapped up by those who could afford them across the Mediterranean. And here's the kicker. This trade wasn't a one-way street. As Celtic goods found their way into Greek and Roman hands, so too did Greek and Roman goods make their way back. We're talking about a cultural exchange that influenced everything from fashion to military tactics. A veritable ancient influencer network long before Instagram was a twinkle in Silicon Valley's eye. Yet, as much as we might want to envision Celtic artisans as idyllic craftsmen, toiling away in harmonious workshops, the reality was a tad grittier. The drive for profit and prestige often led to harsh conditions and labor practices that were as brutal as a Viking raid. Artisans were under constant pressure to meet the demands of a market that was as relentless as it was lucrative. The romantic image of the Celtic craftsman, peacefully etching designs into a golden torque, belies the fact that production was a cutthroat business. It was a world where time was money, and efficiency often trumped artistry. Now, let's talk about the trading relationships with the Greeks and Romans. Oh, what a tangled web. The Celts were no strangers to the complexities of international trade, and their dealings with these southern powerhouses were rife with both opportunity and tension. While trade brought wealth and new ideas, it also brought competition and conflict. The Greeks and Romans were no pushovers. They were as shrewd and calculating as they come, always looking to get the better end of the deal. For the Celts, this meant walking a tightrope between cooperation and competition. a balancing act that required as much strategic finesse as any battle plan. This dynamic created a fascinating interplay of power and influence. The Celts were both revered and feared for their prowess and the quality of their goods, yet they were also seen as barbarians by their more civilized trading partners. This duality is part of what makes the study of Celtic trade so intriguing. They were both insiders and outsiders in the ancient economic world, navigating a landscape fraught with challenges and opportunities. In the end, the mechanics of Celtic trade were a complex tapestry of barter, coinage, craftsmanship, and diplomacy. It was a system that allowed them to thrive and prosper in a world that was constantly changing, a testament to their adaptability and ingenuity. As we continue to explore this vibrant culture, we'll see how these trade networks laid the foundations for future European economic systems and cultural exchanges. So, stay tuned as we unravel more of this ancient story, where the lines between myth and reality are as blurred as a druid's crystal ball. As we dive deeper into the Celtic web of trade, let's unravel how all this commerce wasn't just about beefing up the economy. It was the oil that greased the Celtic social and political machinery. Picture this: warrior elites, those chieftains and nobles who strutted around like peacocks with sharper swords, funded their flashy lifestyles through the spoils of trade. Wealth amassed from trading amber, tin, and those oh-so-essential slaves didn't just line their pockets. It was the currency of power, the stuff that clan rivalries were made of. These warrior elites were like the rock stars of their day, with their wealth and status built on the backs of bustling trade routes. Just as today's celebrities might have their own brands of perfume or overpriced tequila, these chieftains had their hands in every lucrative pie from Iberia to Anatolia. Wealth wasn't just a status symbol. It was a tool for maintaining power. Control the trade, and you controlled the clan. This, in turn, led to fierce rivalries. Let's be honest, nothing like a bit of economic competition to spice up a clan feud. Forget family board games. These were the ancient equivalents of corporate takeovers, complete with the occasional head sharping. And amidst all this testosterone-fueled power play, let's not forget the women. Ah yes, the women. For centuries, history has painted them as background players, but the truth is, they were the unsung CEOs of their time. Historical records, including those from the ever-meticulous Romans, mention female merchants and leaders who were as shrewd and savvy as any of their male counterparts. These women were not just tagging along for the ride. They were driving the chariots of commerce. Take the legendary Boudica, for example. Sure, she's famed for leading an uprising against the Romans, but her leadership skills were honed in the art of negotiation and trade long before she picked up a sword. Celtic women wielded influence not just in the home, but in the marketplace too. They were traders, negotiators, and sometimes even the face of their clan's commercial dealings. Forget the image of the passive Celtic maiden. These women were as tough as the iron they traded. They might not have worn suits and carried briefcases, but make no mistake, they were boardroom bosses in their own right. Now, as goods flowed along these trade routes, so did culture, language, and religion. The Celts were not just trading tin for wine. They were swapping ideas, myths, and even gods. Imagine the cultural melting pot these trade hubs must have been, like an ancient version of a bustling New York City, only with more druids and fewer skyscrapers. As traders from across Europe mingled, they didn't just exchange goods, they exchanged stories, beliefs, and practices. This cultural exchange sprinkled new flavors into the Celtic way of life. For instance, religious practices didn't just stay in one place. They rode the trade winds to distant lands. New deities were introduced, often merging with local gods to create fascinating hybrids. Think of it as divine fusion cuisine, where the Celtic pantheon expanded to include gods influenced by Greco-Roman mythology. Even the language evolved, with words and expressions borrowed from traders who left not just goods, but a linguistic footprint. Trade was the engine of change, turning isolated tribes into interconnected communities. It was an accidental social experiment, with trade routes as the petri dish. As goods moved, so did ideas, shaking the cultural kaleidoscope and creating patterns that were ever-evolving. The Celts weren't just recipients in this cultural exchange. They were active participants, influencing and being influenced in return. So, the next time someone paints the Celts as mere warriors with a penchant for face paint, remind them of the women who brokered deals, the chieftains who leveraged trade for power, and the cultural tapestries woven through the exchange of goods. The Celtic world was as much about commerce and culture as it was about conquest and conflict. It was a society where the lines between the mythical and the mercantile blurred, creating a complex mosaic that modern historians are still piecing together. As we continue to explore this fascinating era, remember that behind every myth lies a kernel of truth, often more intricate and astonishing than the legends themselves. Stay tuned as we delve further into this world of warriors, traders, and cultural exchanges, where the ancient Celts navigated the tricky waters of commerce with a savvy that would make even today's traders take note. As we turn the page into the next chapter of this Celtic saga, picture the landscape shifting like a kaleidoscope under the relentless march of Roman sandals. The Roman Empire, with its insatiable appetite for expansion, began casting its imperial shadow over Europe around 100 BCE. The Celts, those once mighty masters of the trade routes, found themselves facing a juggernaut that made their Iron Age networks look like a quaint artisanal marketplace in comparison. The Romans weren't just showing up with a few centurions and a Caesar salad recipe. No, they brought with them an infrastructure overhaul that would make a modern city planner drool. Roads, straight as an arrow and sturdy enough to withstand the thunder of legionary boots, began crisscrossing the continent. These roads weren't just about moving armies. They were the veins through which the lifeblood of the Roman economy flowed. Suddenly, those meandering Celtic paths seemed more like quaint country lanes than the bustling trade routes they once were. With the rise of Roman power, economic centres began to shift. Gone were the days when Celtic hubs like Bibracte and the hill fort of Manching were the beating hearts of commerce. Instead, the new economic powerhouses sprang up like mushrooms after rain, often in the shadow of Roman military camps. Cities like Lugdunum, modern-day Lyon, and Augusta Treverorum, Trier, became the new centres of trade and power, leaving Celtic strongholds in their wake. The Roman influence wasn't just a matter of laying down roads and flexing military muscle. It was about assimilation, a cultural steamroller that flattened local customs and absorbed them into the ever-expanding Roman way of life. The Celts, far from being the noble savages of romantic myth, were pragmatic survivors. When faced with the Roman onslaught, they didn't stubbornly cling to the old ways. They adapted. They saw the writing on the Roman wall and decided it was time to change the script. One of the most striking adaptations was the shift in trade goods. The Celts had long been known for their metalwork and distinctive jewelry, but as Roman tastes began to dominate, they pivoted. Wine, olive oil, and luxury goods from the Mediterranean became the new currency. It was as if the Celts took one look at the Roman penchant for opulence and thought, if you can't beat them, sell them something fancy. And sell they did. Celtic artisans began crafting goods that catered to Roman tastes, melding their own distinctive styles with that of their conquerors. This wasn't mere capitulation. It was a savvy business move. By blending the best of both worlds, they created products that were uniquely appealing to Roman buyers. It was a case of cultural fusion with a commercial twist, a testament to the Celts' ability to pivot in the face of adversity. And let's not forget the political maneuvering. Celtic leaders, ever the astute negotiators, knew that the Romans respected strength and alliances, so they played the diplomatic game with finesse, forging ties with Roman governors and military leaders. This wasn't about selling out, it was about survival. The Celts understood that to maintain a semblance of autonomy, they needed to make themselves indispensable to their new overlords. To the Romans, the Celts were a curious mix of barbarism and brilliance. They were as likely to befriend a Roman governor as they were to paint themselves blue and charge into battle. It's this duality that made them both feared and respected. But as Rome's influence grew, the Celts' reputation as fearsome warriors began to wane, replaced by a new image, that of shrewd traders and adaptable allies. Yet, the myth of the noble savage persists, fueled by the romantic notion of a people untouched by the trappings of civilization. The reality, however, was far more complex. The Celts were not passive victims of Roman expansion. They were active participants in the reshaping of their world, pragmatically embracing the changes necessary to thrive under Roman rule. As Roman legions marched and trade networks reoriented, the Celtic world was irrevocably changed. The Celts may have lost their independence, but they didn't lose their identity. They adapted, absorbed, and ultimately influenced the very empire that sought to assimilate them. Their legacy is not just in the artifacts they left behind, but in the cultural and economic exchanges that helped shape the Roman Empire. So, while the romanticized image of the Celts as wild, untamed warriors is an appealing one, the truth is far more nuanced. They were masters of adaptation, blending their own traditions with those of their conquerors to create a new, hybrid culture. It's a testament to their resilience and ingenuity, qualities that ensured their survival long after the last Roman legion had left the shores of Britain. As we continue to unravel this fascinating tale, we'll explore how these changes set the stage for the next chapter in Celtic history, a story of reinvention, resistance, and resilience that still resonates today. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into this world of cultural fusion and economic transformation, where the Celts proved that survival is as much about adaptation as it is about strength. As the Roman legions peeled back like a tide, leaving behind a Europe forever altered, the Celts found themselves navigating a new world, a world where their once mighty trade networks had been both a launching pad for prosperity and a lifeline for survival. Yet, the story of the Celts didn't end with Roman dominance. Instead, it evolved, much like a river reshaping its path over time, leaving an indelible mark on the cultural and economic tapestry of Europe. The legacy of the Celtic trade networks is like that old family recipe passed down through generations, not always perfectly preserved, but unmistakably influential. These trade routes weren't just highways for tin and amber. They were the arteries through which culture and ideas flowed. The Celts, with their knack for trade and innovation, effectively laid the groundwork for a Europe that was more interconnected than a modern smartphone network. Take the concept of trade itself. The Celts were pioneers in establishing long-range trade routes that spanned the continent, creating a web of connections that would eventually be mirrored by later European trade empires. Their ability to navigate these routes without the crutch of modern technology is a testament to their geographical savvy. We're talking about people who could find their way through dense forests and over mountains without so much as a compass, let alone Google Maps. But let's talk about those pesky romantic myths that cling to Celtic history like a persistent barnacle. The image of Celts as mystical, free-spirited warriors, untouched by the corrupting influence of civilization, is as appealing as it is misleading. Modern media loves to paint them as nature-loving druids frolicking in the moonlight, but archaeological evidence paints a picture of a society deeply engaged in the complex, often cutthroat world of commerce. Romantic notions aside, the Celts were savvy traders who understood the power of a well-negotiated deal better than any modern hedge fund manager. And speaking of deals, let's not ignore the influence of Celtic craftsmanship. Their artisans were the rock stars of their time, and their work was the ancient equivalent of today's luxury brands. Celtic metalwork, with its intricate designs and high-quality materials, set a bar for craftsmanship that was recognized across the ancient world. These weren't just trinkets, they were status symbols, the Rolex watches of their day. And the trade of such goods wasn't just about wealth. It was about spreading influence and culture, embedding Celtic aesthetics into the broader European consciousness. Yet, for all their economic prowess, the Celts were not immune to the harsh realities of the ancient world. Slavery, an uncomfortable but undeniable part of their trade networks, was a grim testament to the complexity of their society. While we might want to imagine a world of free trade and mutual benefit, the truth is that the wheels of the Celtic economy were often greased by the exploitation of human labor. It's a stark reminder that beneath the romance of trade lies a history wrought with ethical dilemmas. Now, fast forward to today, and you can still see the fingerprints of Celtic innovation all over modern Europe. Their influence on language, for example, is undeniable. Many European languages carry Celtic loanwords, linguistic echoes of a time when these ancient traders were plying their routes. And in crafts, the legacy of Celtic design can be seen in everything from the iconic Celtic knot patterns that adorn jewelry to the revival of their metalworking techniques by modern artisans. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Celts is the idea of cultural exchange as a driver of progress. In a world increasingly defined by borders and divisions, the Celtic trade networks remind us that prosperity often lies in open exchange and the blending of cultures. It's a lesson as relevant today as it was over 2 millennia ago. In the end, the story of the Celts is a complex tapestry woven with threads of trade, culture, and resilience. They were more than the mythic warriors of popular imagination. They were the architects of a connected Europe, setting the stage for future generations. So, next time you hear the haunting notes of a Celtic tune or see the intricate lines of a Celtic design, remember the traders who navigated Europe long before the age of empires. Their legacy is not just in the artifacts they left behind, but in the enduring spirit of connection and exchange that they championed. It's a story worth telling, and one that still has much to teach us in our own era of globalization and cultural exchange. Sogdian traders, the unsung heroes of ancient globalization. These folks were the real deal, the OGs of international trade, who made the Silk Road hum like a well-oiled machine well before it was cool to be a global citizen. Nestled in Central Asia, Sogdiana was strategically placed like the ultimate hub in a vast network. Picture a map of Central Asia with Sogdiana smack dab in the middle, perfectly positioned to act as the crossroads for all things trade-related. It was like living in the neighborhood that all the best food delivery apps coveted. Now, Sogdians weren't just traders. They were the Silk Road's FedEx. Long before the term, overnight shipping was even a twinkle in a logistics manager's eye. They transported everything from Chinese silk to Indian spices to Persian carpets, not to mention a few cultural ideologies and a smattering of languages along the way. This wasn't your average Amazon Prime delivery. These guys hauled goods over thousands of miles, across deserts and mountains, through political instability and the occasional bandit attack. They were the real MVPs, ensuring that your ancient ancestors could drape themselves in fine silk or sprinkle exotic spices on their dinner. Sogdiana itself was a region that now straddles parts of modern-day Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, with well-known cities like Samarkand and Bukhara serving as its pulsating heart. These cities weren't just strategically located. They were also cultural melting pots where ideas, religions, and goods exchanged hands as frequently as currency. It was here that the Sogdians honed their skills in diplomacy and trade, becoming masters of negotiation and masters of survival in a world that often threatened both. The early days of Sogdian trade were likely as chaotic as they were exhilarating. Try to imagine a time when long-distance communication meant sending a guy on a camel, and you'll start to appreciate the sheer audacity of these traders. The Sogdians were dealing with a logistical nightmare. They didn't have GPS, Google Maps, or even a postal service, yet somehow they managed to create a network so vast and effective that it would make even modern logistics companies envious. It's like they had their own secret sauce, a blend of innovation, guts, and a bit of luck. The Sogdians didn't just ferry goods. They carried stories, ideas, and even religions. They were instrumental in the spread of Buddhism from India to China, thanks to the trading routes that wound their way through the mountains and deserts of Asia. It's not every day that you can say a bunch of merchants were responsible for a major religious movement, but the Sogdians were anything but ordinary. They were the ancient world's equivalent of influencers, only instead of posting selfies, they were spreading cultures and ideas. Now, if you think their lives were all about glamorous travel and cultural exchanges, think again. The Sogdian traders had to deal with more than just the odd sandstorm. There were taxes at every turn, imposed by the local rulers whose lands they crossed. Bandits were a perpetual threat, and let's not forget the occasional war or political upheaval that could turn a peaceful trading region into a no-go zone faster than you can say, trade embargo. Despite these challenges, the Sogdians thrived. They perfected the art of diplomacy, knowing when to bow to authority and when to shut up and keep moving. Records from the time speak of their adaptability and resourcefulness, which were essential traits when navigating the ever-shifting political landscapes of Eurasia. It's no wonder they were trusted middlemen for centuries. Trust, after all, was the currency that mattered most on the Silk Road. Fast forward to the 7th century, and the Sogdians were at the height of their influence. They had a network that stretched from the Chinese Tang dynasty in the east to the Byzantine Empire in the west, and they knew how to play both sides to their advantage. These guys were the ultimate opportunists, and they made sure to keep themselves in the game by adapting to whatever the world threw at them. Whether it was learning new languages or adopting new religions, the Sogdians were chameleons in the world of trade. It's worth noting that the Sogdians weren't just businessmen, they were cultural brokers, too. They helped spread Zoroastrianism and Manichaeism, and their art and architecture left a lasting impact on the regions they touched. They were the package deal, offering not just goods, but also a taste of the exotic world beyond the horizon. So, as we delve deeper into the story of the Sogdian traders over the coming parts, keep in mind these early pioneers of globalization didn't just trade silk and spices. They traded in ideas, beliefs, and cultural practices, enriching the tapestry of human history with every deal they struck. They were the Silk Road's lifeline, the unsung heroes who made the world a smaller, more connected place long before anyone knew what the term global village meant. In a world that often feels disconnected, their legacy is a reminder that sometimes the best way to connect is by sharing a story or a piece of silk. So, as we delve deeper into the story of the Sogdian traders over the coming parts, keep in mind these early pioneers of globalization didn't just trade silk and spices. They traded in ideas, beliefs, and cultural practices, enriching the tapestry of human history with every deal they struck. They were the Silk Road's lifeline, the unsung heroes who made the world a smaller, more connected place long before anyone knew what the term global village meant. In a world that often feels disconnected, their legacy is a reminder that sometimes the best way to connect is by sharing a story or a piece of silk. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty of how these Silk Road virtuosos managed to pull off their trading empire without the luxury of modern conveniences. First off, let's talk logistics. If the Sogdians had a motto, it might have been something like, "Have camel, will travel." Camels were the Rolls-Royce of desert travel, and these humpbacked beasts were the backbone of Sogdian trade. Imagine a caravan of up to 100 camels, each capable of carrying around 200 kg of goods, plodding through the treacherous terrain of Central Asia. These weren't leisurely strolls, mind you. A caravan might cover up to 40 kilometers a day if the weather and political climate cooperated. Trade routes were the ancient world's highways, and the Sogdians were like master travel agents, knowing every shortcut, oasis, and safe haven along the way. Silk Road was not a single path, but a sprawling network of routes that crisscrossed deserts, mountains, and empires. Sogdian traders had to be savvy navigators, constantly adjusting their routes based on everything from seasonal weather patterns to the whims of local warlords. Remember, this was a time when the closest thing to a weather app was looking at the sky and hoping for the best. Commodities were the currency of these journeys, and the Sogdians were like the ancient world's Amazon, offering a dizzying array of products. Silk from China, spices from India, precious metals from Persia, and even exotic fruits and medicinal herbs were part of their cargo. Silk was the superstar, though. It was light, valuable, and in constant demand, especially in the Roman Empire, where senators could drape themselves in silk to convey status, much like today's obsession with designer labels. The Sogdians were savvy marketers, too. They knew that a bolt of silk could command a price up to 10 times higher in Rome than in its place of origin. But it wasn't all about the goods. Diplomacy and negotiation were the secret weapons of the Sogdian traders. They were like the ancient world's corporate deal-makers, able to strike a bargain with a smile and a carefully chosen word. Sogdian merchants were multilingual, fluent in Sogdian, Chinese, and Persian, among others, making them indispensable intermediaries in a multicultural world. They were masters of the soft sell, able to navigate the delicate social hierarchies and political landscapes of the empires they traded with. Now, it wasn't just their ability to speak multiple languages that made them effective. It was their knack for understanding cultural nuances. Imagine trying to broker a deal in a foreign land where a simple gesture could mean the difference between sealing a deal and starting a feud. The Sogdians were adept at reading the room, so to speak, ensuring that they stayed on the right side of the local leaders. This skill was crucial when passing through territories where a misstep could lead to confiscated goods or worse. And let's not forget the darker side of trade. Taxes and tolls were an ever-present headache. Every petty king and warlord wanted a cut of the action, and Sogdian traders had to be prepared to grease a few palms to keep the goods moving. Sometimes the price of doing business was steep, but the Sogdians were pragmatic. They understood that paying off a local chieftain was just another line in the cost of goods sold, albeit one that didn't come with a receipt. The Sogdians' adaptability extended beyond the negotiating table. They were cultural chameleons, often adopting the customs and religions of the lands they traded with. This wasn't just strategic, it was survival. By integrating into local societies, they could build trust and forge alliances that would protect their interests. It's no surprise, then, that Sogdian communities could be found from China to Byzantium, each one a little different, reflecting the local culture, but always retaining a bit of that Sogdian flair. So, while it's tempting to romanticize the life of a Sogdian trader as one of exotic adventures and high-stakes negotiations, the reality was far more complex. It was a life of constant movement, uncertainty, and risk. Yet, for the Sogdians, the rewards were worth it. They weren't just trading goods, they were weaving the threads of history, connecting cultures and economies in ways that would resonate for centuries. As we continue to unravel their story, keep in mind that every bolt of silk and every sack of spices carried with it the hopes and dreams of a people who dared to traverse the known world, one camel step at a time. The Sogdians, in their relentless pursuit of trade, didn't just haul silk and spices. They carried the seeds of cultural transformation. These guys were the ancient world's version of cultural ambassadors, but instead of wearing suits and shaking hands, they were more about weaving silk and exchanging ideas. Their caravans were like mobile TED talks, spreading knowledge, religion, and art as they traversed the Silk Road. Let's talk religion first because, oh boy, did the Sogdians make an impact there. They were instrumental in the spread of Buddhism from India into China, and if you think of them as the original cross-cultural missionaries, you're not far off. Now, don't imagine these traders as pious monks or saints with halos over their heads. No, they were pragmatic merchants who knew that religion could be a great icebreaker. Picture this. A Sogdian trader rolls into a new city, his camels laden with goods, and starts talking about the Dharma. It wasn't just about spirituality. It was about building trust and forging connections. Zoroastrianism, their homegrown faith originating from Persia, was also on their cultural menu. The Sogdians were like the ancient world's boutique religion shop, offering a taste of the exotic to those they met. But they didn't stop there. As Islam rose in the 7th century, the Sogdians again played their ambassadorial role, facilitating the religion's spread along their trade routes. By the time you hit the 10th century, many Sogdian communities had embraced Islam, showing their adaptability wasn't just about business but belief too. Now, before you start romanticizing these traders as altruistic cultural missionaries, let's add a dash of realism. The Sogdians weren't purely motivated by noble intentions. There was a business model behind their cultural exchange. By acting as conduits for religious ideas, they weren't just spreading faith, they were creating demand. A shared religion meant shared trust, and shared trust meant smoother trade. It was a win-win, salvation for some, silk for others. The Sogdians also left their artistic mark, which was as colorful as the silks they traded. Their art was a vibrant fusion of influences, blending Persian, Indian, and Chinese motifs into something uniquely Sogdian. You could say they were like the ancient world's first fusion chefs, mixing ingredients from different cultures to create something entirely new. This wasn't just art for art's sake. It was art as a calling card. Their intricate textiles, pottery, and murals were both products and advertisements, showcasing the Sogdians' cosmopolitan flair. And speaking of fusion cuisine, let's not overlook the Sogdians' influence on food. They were the original foodies, introducing new flavors across continents. The spices and ingredients they traded weren't just commodities. They were catalysts for culinary revolutions. Imagine a world without the exchange of ingredients that the Sogdians facilitated. No noodles in Italy, no spices in European stews. It's like a world without guacamole, just unthinkable. Language was another area where the Sogdians excelled. They weren't just multilingual, they were linguistic trendsetters. The Sogdian script evolved into a sort of lingua franca of the Silk Road, used in trade documents and correspondence across diverse regions. It was a script that bridged gaps, a tool that facilitated not just commerce but communication in a multicultural world. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of English today, a common language that enabled trade and diplomacy. But don't get too carried away picturing the Sogdians as some sort of utopian cultural exchange program. They were practical, sometimes ruthless, businessmen who understood that every interaction was a transaction. Their cultural and religious exchanges were as much about securing trade advantages as they were about spreading enlightenment. They knew that a well-placed story or a shared belief could open doors that remained stubbornly closed to outsiders. The Sogdians' ability to adapt and integrate into different cultures was both their strength and their secret weapon. Their communities darted across the Silk Road weren't isolated enclaves, but vibrant hubs of interaction. By adopting local customs and marrying into local families, they embedded themselves deeply into the social fabrics of the societies they traded with. This wasn't just cultural assimilation. It was strategic integration. They understood that to succeed in a world as diverse and dynamic as theirs, you had to be a little bit of everything to everyone. So, while it's easy to romanticize the Sogdians as cultural heroes, spreading enlightenment with every step, the reality was more nuanced. They were opportunists, yes, but also visionaries who saw the potential in every cultural exchange. They didn't just trade in goods, they traded in ideas, beliefs, and cultural practices, weaving them into a complex tapestry that connected empires and enriched civilizations. Their legacy is a reminder of the power of cultural exchange, not just as a means of survival, but as a catalyst for progress. As we continue to unravel the story of the Sogdian traders, keep in mind that their impact was as much about what they left behind as what they carried. They were the Silk Road's cultural lifeline, the unsung ambassadors who made the world a smaller, more connected place long before anyone coined the term globalization. In a world that often feels fragmented, their story is a testament to the enduring power of cultural connection. And as we delve deeper into their influence, remember that every trade route was a pathway to a new world, and every Sogdian trader was a guide on that journey. As we wade deeper into the saga of the Sogdian traders, let's pivot to the political chessboard they danced across with an agility that would put Olympic gymnasts to shame. These traders weren't simply navigating sandy trails. They were threading their way through a labyrinth of empires rising and falling like dominoes in a cosmic game of thrones. The Persian Empire, the Tang dynasty, and a slew of other powerhouses were the heavyweights they rubbed shoulders with, sometimes congenially, sometimes with a dagger up their sleeves. Now, imagine the Persian Empire, a sprawling leviathan as formidable as its founder Cyrus the Great. At its zenith, around the 6th century BCE, it stretched over 5 million square kilometers, from the Balkans to the Indus Valley. The Sogdians, nestled snugly in Central Asia, found themselves in the empire's crosshairs. But these traders were anything but passive subjects. They leveraged their position at the empire's edge like hedge fund managers, exploiting their status as middlemen between the mighty Persians and the vibrant markets of India and China. The Persians needed the Sogdians not just for trade, but for their unrivaled knack for diplomacy. It was like hiring a PR firm that also delivered your mail. Jump ahead to the Tang dynasty, reigning supreme in China from 618 to 907 CE, a golden era of cultural, economic, and territorial expansion. The Tang were all about that Silk Road life, and the Sogdians were the roadies making sure the show went on without a hitch. The Tang court was a cultural cocktail party, and Sogdian traders were the bartenders, mixing ingredients from across Asia to please the palates of emperors and officials. The Sogdians, with their linguistic prowess and business acumen, were invaluable to the Tang, who saw them as the ultimate cultural connectors, a sort of ancient LinkedIn. But let's not sugarcoat it. Politics back then was a minefield, and the Sogdians had to tiptoe through it with the grace of a ballerina in a field of bear traps. Empires were not just abstract entities. They were unpredictable beasts with appetites for power and control. The Sogdians had to navigate the whims of emperors and the edicts of bureaucrats, balancing on a political tightrope with nothing but cunning and charm to keep them from tumbling into oblivion. This balancing act often meant playing the role of spies or diplomats, sometimes both simultaneously. The Sogdians were like the James Bonds of the Silk Road, gathering intelligence under the guise of trade, passing on crucial information with a nod and a wink. In a world where information was power, these traders were loaded. Their ability to gather and relay intelligence made them indispensable to the empires they engaged with, a fact not lost on rulers who valued knowledge just as much as gold. However, this double-edged sword of espionage and diplomacy came with its own set of hazards. Being a spy wasn't all about suave espionage and sipping martinis. Tea. It was a high-stakes game where the wrong word or misjudged alliance could lead to a swift and often fatal career change. The Sogdians' diplomatic skills were legendary, but even legends have their limits. They walked a fine line between commerce and subterfuge, and for every successful mission, there was the looming threat of exposure. Let's talk about challenges too, because these guys didn't just coast through a peaceful landscape of trade and trust. The Sogdians faced political instability like a constant thorn in their side. Empires were as fickle as the weather, and wars could erupt faster than a camel could blink. The fall of the Sasanian Empire in the 7th century, following the Arab conquests, was a seismic event that rippled through the trade networks the Sogdians had so carefully cultivated. Imagine building a house of cards only to have a gust of wind, courtesy of history's unfathomable breath, blow it all away. And then there were the Mongols. The Mongols, Genghis Khan's legacy of conquest and chaos. By the 13th century, the Mongol Empire was the largest contiguous empire in history. While they did eventually secure the Silk Road under a single banner, the initial waves of Mongol expansion were less about trade and more about, well, everything but. The Sogdians, caught in the crossfire, had to adapt or perish. Many of their communities were absorbed or obliterated in the Mongols' relentless march across Asia. So, what happened when the political tides finally turned against our intrepid traders? Picture a grand stage where the script suddenly changes, and the Sogdians, once the stars of the show, find themselves in the wings. The rise of maritime trade routes, with faster and safer sea passages, began to eclipse the overland routes. By the late Middle Ages, the Silk Road was losing its luster, replaced by the allure of oceanic voyages that bypassed the risks of land travel. The decline of the Sogdian trade network was not a sudden collapse, but a gradual fade. As empires shifted their focus from land to sea, the Sogdians were left with fewer opportunities to ply their trade. The vibrant communities they had established along the Silk Road slowly dwindled, leaving behind echoes of their once great influence. But hey, they didn't go out without leaving their mark. Their legacy of cultural exchange and diplomacy left a lasting imprint on the regions they touched. In the end, the story of the Sogdian traders is one of adaptability and resilience in the face of shifting empires and changing times. They were the Silk Road's lifeline, threading together cultures and economies with the deftness of a weaver. Their decline might have been inevitable, but their impact was indelible. So, as we prepare to delve into the final chapter of their story, let's remember that the Sogdians were more than just traders. They were the pioneers of an interconnected world, navigating the seas of change with an unyielding spirit. So, as our saga of the Sogdian traders draws to a close, let's wrap things up by looking at their legacy. These were the folks who turned a dusty trade route into the ancient world's superhighway. They were the original masters of globalization, long before the term was ever coined, and their influence stretched far beyond the Silk Road's serpentine paths. Picture them as the unsung architects of a global village, where not just goods, but ideas, beliefs, and cultures were exchanged. But let's not get too swept away by romanticism. The reality was far more nuanced, a tale of survival, savvy, and sometimes sheer audacity. First, let's talk about the gritty truth of the Silk Road. It wasn't all exotic adventures and silken robes. This was no romantic camel caravan gliding over golden sands with a backdrop of an endless sunset. No, it was a grueling slog through some of the most inhospitable terrain on Earth. Think searing deserts, towering mountains, and bandit-infested paths. Those romantic notions of camel caravans are about as accurate as imagining the postal service as a fleet of unicorns. For the Sogdians, each journey was a calculated risk, balancing the potential for profit against the very real dangers of the road. And yet, despite these challenges, they thrived. Their secret, adaptability. The Sogdians were like the Swiss army knives of the ancient world, versatile, multifunctional, and ready for any situation. They could negotiate like diplomats, adapt like chameleons, and trade like tycoons. They spoke multiple languages and understood the cultural nuances of their trading partners far better than most modern corporations do today. If they had a motto, it might have been, adapt or perish. A philosophy as relevant now as it was then. Let's also dispel another myth. The Silk Road was not a single, unbroken trail. It was a complex web of routes connecting east and west, a spaghetti junction of paths through which the Sogdians expertly navigated. They were not just traders. They were the conductors of a vast orchestra playing the symphony of early globalization. Their ability to weave together diverse cultural threads into a cohesive tapestry laid the groundwork for centuries of economic and cultural exchange. Fast forward to today, and you might wonder what all this has to do with our modern world. Well, in a sense, the Sogdian legacy is still very much alive. Look at the global economy, where goods, ideas, and cultures intermingle at a speed that would make a Sogdian's head spin. The principles they lived by, trust, adaptability, and cultural exchange, are the same ones underpinning modern trade. They taught us that commerce isn't just about the exchange of goods. It's about the exchange of ideas, the building of bridges, and the creation of a global community. In terms of influence, the Sogdians were like the original influencers. No TikTok or Instagram required. They didn't just trade silk. They traded stories, religions, and innovations. Buddhism spread from India to China, thanks in part to their efforts. The Sogdian script, a precursor to several modern alphabets, was used across Central Asia, a testament to their linguistic legacy. They were cultural brokers, connecting empires and enriching civilizations in ways that resonate even today. Now, let's not sugarcoat the past with too much nostalgia. The notion of the Silk Road as some utopian avenue of cultural exchange ignores the harsh realities faced by those who traveled it. The Sogdians were pragmatic, sometimes ruthless, in pursuit of their goals. They understood that every deal was a negotiation, and every path fraught with potential peril. They paid tolls to pass through territories, bribed officials, and dodged bandits, all while keeping their eyes on the prize. It was a world where trust was currency, and a misplaced word could cost you a fortune or your life. In many ways, the Sogdian story is a cautionary tale about the complexities of globalization. While they forged connections that spanned continents, they also faced the inevitable challenges of change and adaptation. The decline of the Silk Road wasn't just due to the rise of maritime trade. It was also a result of shifting political landscapes and technological advancements that made their traditional routes obsolete. It's a reminder that even the most established networks can falter in the face of progress. Yet, the legacy of the Sogdian traders is not one of failure, but of transformation. Their story is a testament to the power of human resilience and innovation. They were pioneers of global trade, cultural ambassadors who traversed the known world, leaving indelible marks on the cultures they touched. Their influence can still be felt in the art, languages, and religions that flourished in their wake. So, as we bid farewell to the Sogdians, let's remember them not just as traders, but as visionaries. They were the unsung heroes of ancient globalization, weaving the world together with threads of silk and stories. In our modern era of interconnectedness, their tale serves as both an inspiration and a warning. It's a story of ambition and adaptability, of cultural exchange and economic ingenuity. A reminder that while the paths we take may change, the journey to connect and create is timeless.